Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Monday, February 28th, last day of February. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. We've got a great lineup on today's show. We are going to get things kicked off today with a conversation between Alan and TJ Germaluck, who is the CEO and co-founder of Beyond Identity. Recently, on February 22nd actually, Beyond Identity announced new funding for an invisible, unphishable multi-factor authentication solution, and the valuation or the funding actually valuated the company beyond unicorn status. So good stuff there. So TJ and Alan talk about the technology and the funding and what Beyond Identity is going to be doing with the money. Good stuff. After that, Alan speaks with Eric Carter, who's the Director of Product Marketing over at Sysdig, and Jim Armstrong, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing over at Snyk. Snyk and Sysdig recently collaborated on a new container security partnership, which actually kind of pulls together the Sysdig secure technology with the Snyk container technology, integrates the two to cover container security from development through operations. So this is a great advancement in the world of container security. And so Eric and Jim talk with Alan about what the partnership means, what it brings to the container security landscape, and how the two organizations are going to work together. Great stuff. All right, after that, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast with Mike Jones, the host. This is part one of a two-part conversation that Mike has with Mary Galloway, who's the CEO and founding board member for the Women's Society of Cyberjutsu. Actually, I spoke with Mary a couple months ago, and I thought she was such a dynamic and interesting person that I sent her over to Mike Jones for his podcast because I really think she's got some great ideas in the world of cybersecurity and getting more underrepresented communities involved in cybersecurity. And so Mary and Mike talk about just so many different things related to cybersecurity, bringing in this next generation and a more diverse population of employees in cybersecurity and so much more. It's a great conversation. You definitely want to check it out. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2020 event. This one features Damon Edwards, who is the Senior Director of Product over at PagerDuty. His presentation is titled, You Build It, You Run It, Hits Its Stride in the Enterprise. And he highlights why high-performing companies are moving toward that You Build It, You Own It model, and how they are doing it and why everyone should be paying attention to this trend. It's a really, really interesting discussion. Want to check it out for sure. After that, I'm back with the news headlines, and then I am speaking with Mike Jones again, and he is actually the perfect person for me to be talking about this particular topic with. We discuss the escalating tension and war, actually, now that's happening over in the Ukraine as Russia has invaded it, and really looking at some of the things that folks aren't really thinking about or talking about when it comes to what's happening over there, as well as obviously the cybersecurity implications of what's going on. And it's definitely worth a listen to. Mike's got some really great insight as a veteran and as a former hacker. He has a particular insight and a point of view regarding what's going on over there and what we as Americans really need to think about and really take seriously. So great conversation with Mike. He's such a smart guy. After that, I've got the webinars preview for you, and then we have the View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Cloudian CTO Gary Ogasawara, and they talk about how to thwart ransomware attacks in Kubernetes environments. Good stuff there as well. What a great lineup we have on today's show, and I hope you can stick around for the whole thing. We're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, we're back. First up on Techstrong TV today, we've got a conversation between Alan Schimel and TJ Germaluck, who is the CEO and co-founder of Beyond Identity. They're talking about new funding that Beyond Identity recently received. It was actually I guess it was about a week ago. They received this funding for its invisible, unfishable, multi-factor authentication solution that pushes the company into unicorn status. Great stuff. It's a great conversation about a great technology. And congratulations to Beyond Identity for their funding. So great conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to have my friend Tom Germaluck, TJ, returning to us here on Techstrong TV with some great news from the Beyond Identity team. Tom, welcome back to Techstrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. Really great to see you again.
Yep. You don't mind if I say TJ, because I find
TJ's easy.
Okay.
That's what everybody uses.
Yeah, I find it easier. So TJ, it's probably been, I'm going to guess it's been 8 or 9 months, I think, since maybe the last time we had you on. And I'm sure you guys have been busy, and you're going to share with our audience. But before we get to the news, let's make sure we kind of level set. Not everyone may know or be familiar with Beyond Identity. Why don't you, if you don't mind, give people a little kind of the elevator pitch, if you will, for Beyond Identity?
Sure. Well, we were born with the simple idea that passwords are the root of all evil. There's no such thing as a shared secret. What's the old joke? A secret's something you tell one person at a time. And, and then they get around. And if you look at all the mess that's gone on in the cybersecurity field over the last 10 or 20 years, it all starts because you have this password there. And people try, well, let's add more characters. Let's make you change it every 30 days. And nothing works. And what's happened, is that all these industries have sprung up like MFA and VPN, and that just add layers and layers, Band-Aids on the open wound of passwords, if you will, trying to make them more secure, unsuccessfully, but adding tremendous friction to the user's experience. Oh, I've got to enter another factor. I've got to get a code. I've got to use my phone to authorize my computer, whatever it might be. And people don't like it. So the adoption in the industry of these other forms has been very low. So we started out with a different premise, which is just, let's remove the password from the architecture altogether. Amazon doesn't use a password when it goes to get paid by Visa for a transaction when you buy something on Amazon. It uses standard asymmetric public key cryptography. Only why hasn't anybody ever taken that and included the users in that? And that's what we do. So for the first time, we take what's used on the web and we extend it out, and we allow users on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, your desktop at work to use exactly that same scalable, secure technology that banks and e-commerce companies use to move trillions of dollars every day. So that was our premise.
Absolutely. And TJ, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I mean, this isn't your first foray into SSL and secure socket layers and stuff like that. You were there when it was invented, right? You were part of the team that brought this to the web, to the internet, back in Netscape, right? With Jim Clark and then of course the whole Mark Andreessen and the whole team there. Right. It is funny, not funny. I guess funny is not the right word. It's questionable why, when we had this technology for so long, and we've all known that passwords, I'm in security 25 years. It's been an issue. It's been an issue. And why hasn't anyone kind of taken this approach to it?
I know it's a great question, but look, until somebody, rolled a stone cut wheel up to the other person and said, "Hey, look at this." Nobody thought of it. When I went to Tahir Elgamal, who wrote the original SSL X509 protocol that's still in use today, when at Netscape, working with Jim Clark, of course, been my partner for 35 years now. And he got the Marconi Award for doing that. Tahir did. and has been an advisor to our company. And when we first went to him and said, hey, we have this idea about how to put that on users' machines. Here's how we can do it. And he looked at me and he thought about it as we explained it. And he goes, how did I never think of this? And then he goes, wait, no, how did nobody ever think of this? Right. And we're like, yeah. Like a lot of things, it is absolutely simple. Like when I explain it to potential customers or partners in 5 minutes, they get it. Like, oh my God, so it's just one of those things that sometimes it's sitting there waiting for somebody to think of doing it that way, turning the problem on its head, so to speak. And it's been fantastic. So Taher was on our technical advisory board, and now he's actually joining our full board as the representative of Evolution Equity Partners, who's our lead investors for our new Series C round.
Great, very cool. Well, that's a great segue. That's what we're here to talk a little bit about. You kind of alluded to it. Give us the news on that.
Yeah, so we just closed our Series C financing. We raised $100 million for the company, all new money, all primary investment in the company. We're very excited about it. Taher El-Gamal will be joining our board, our board of directors, representing Evolution Equity Partners, who's our lead in that. We have some great other partners who've joined them. They're a tremendous experienced investor in cybersecurity. Have followed the company and known a number of people on my team for a long time. So it's really great having them partner with us. We also have Potentum partners who are based in Australia and will help us with our Asia Pacific expansion, and Expanding Capital, who come out of Latin America and will help us with our expansion there as well. So we've got some really good people who've joined in the round who are going to help us kind of launch this next growth phase for the company.
That's fantastic. And look, in today's world, after 2 years of dealing with the COVID stuff, it's good to be thinking about global expansion, right? I think a lot of, even us here at MediaOps, at Techstrong, formerly MediaOps, we're looking at doing in-person events this year, and our initial thing was, well, let's stick to North America for now, right? We'll stay in NFL cities, and then Q3, Q4, if things are good, we'll look for EMEA and then APAC after. But I think we're all hoping, TJ, that we go back to being a global economy, and that, especially in the tech space, we don't know borders, right? We bring solutions to the world.
That's right.
And important. So let's talk. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we expanded last year into EMEA, and we've started traveling again over to EMEA for conferences and customer visits. Myself and my team are out here right now in California and Silicon Valley. We have quite a few customer visits in person. So it's really, you're feeling like some of that is starting to open up again. I think we all learned that having Zoom available is tremendous. It's been a great benefit for us in the era of COVID and remote work to be able to stay connected. But there are certain activities that are still better done in a face-to-face setting. And certainly the ones in our industry where we're very tech forward, very creative, very innovative. It helps to be sitting in front of a whiteboard when a customer asks a question or comes up with an idea. You can just go up and sketch out, okay, here's what we do with the architecture. Here's how it could solve that problem. Here's where we're going. And in a very simple interchange, be able to get very complicated ideas across. So I think there's no substitute for some part of our time being back in an in. Setting.
I couldn't agree more with you. Zoom, when you're what's the saying? When you're a one-eyed man in the land of the blind, you're the king, right?
You're the king. That's right.
Right. But it's a poor substitute. Anyway, all right. So $100 million is a lot of money. What does it mean for beyond expanding globally into new markets, right, from a technology, from a solution perspective for our audience? What right. might we expect to see kind of, new product or features in?
Yeah, so, our product originally we launched was intended for companies to protect their employees and their own internal assets, their data and their network and their servers and their employees from outside attacks. We are shifting to be able to also support two other populations for a company. That is their customers. So a direct effect from a e-commerce company or a service provider to their customers and downloading their applications onto those customer computers or allowing browser access to be able to protect that securely. So customer setup. And then also a developer setup. The supply chain hacks that have happened, SolarWinds being the best example, but there's been so many of them, all have to do with malware being injected into your source code system by bad actors and then not being found by whatever process you're sort of searching through your code before it gets compiled and sent out down the supply chain. So we created from our core product the only product in the industry that actually verifies and signs the code as it goes into the source code directory. So we're on what we call the prevention side instead of detection and response. There's a lot of people who play later in the stack, and they're trying to find bad malware once it's in the source code and respond to that. Well, we're like, why don't you prevent it from going in the first place? So today, when people use a source code repository, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. And it's not a fault of theirs, but those systems have no way to protect and identify who's checking the code in. So SSH keys, GPG keys are just commonly used by developers on any system to push code in. And now what we have is a system whereby we know that TJ checked that code in. So if there's anything wrong, we can go back and say, hey, TJ, what was up with this code? Instead of you going into your Git repository and it says, who checked that code? And it says Daffy Duck, because the developer can make it be anything they want. So that's and
sometimes developers like to do that too.
All the time.
Yeah.
Or it'll be a machine name or something that you don't know how to tie it together.
Agreed.
So those areas are taking our current product and going to these adjacent markets with the same technology. So we're able to, have a go-to-market strategy into employees, into customers, and into developers. And so that's what we're going to be pushing on with this new funding and capital, is expansion of the product into these new markets.
Yep. TJ, from my time in startup world, you always get into the argument, is that a feature or a product? It would seem to me as it applies to like Git or repositories in general, not just Git, that should be a feature of every repository, right? The secured identity of those who are uploading to it. And I don't know, it sounds like a great biz dev kind of role for someone to go out and do OEMs into the repository providers, right? That should be built into every repo.
Yeah, well, we've already got joint marketing agreements with all of them. They're very, very excited about it, and we're in their online marketplace that people can select us as one of the tools that you can use for those repositories. So they've been very supportive of the whole thing.
Yeah. would
yeah, we're
imagine.
totally open if they want to actually integrate it into the product. Obviously, that would be a fantastic thing for their companies as well. Look, they want to be as secure as possible, so they're very open-minded towards these kinds of innovations. For us, the benefit of doing it is that it's already part of our product, so why not offer it that way? So we didn't have to invent it as a separate feature, if you will. It was already part of how we do our core architecture.
Yeah, no, well, it's a case of, for Beyond Identity, it's a product, right?
Yes.
For the Git or for the repository people,
right.
It has to be a feature of them.
That's right.
But like everything else, it'll happen when their customers ask for it.
Right.
And that's what makes the world go round. And they are.
Yeah.
They have to.
There's a number of companies working in secure DevOps that basically try and take your source code repository and run these tests against it to try and find malware. This string or that configuration, just like McAfee runs on your computer looking for viruses and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But again, that's all the next step down. It's after the fact. That means the malware already found its way into your system. And so there's two problems with doing that way. One is that it's already there instead of having been blocked. The second is if you find it and try and go back to see who put it in, you can't find out who put it in. So you might find that code, great, but you can't go back and say, oh, it was this person and that's how it got in and let's stop that from happening. So we're complementary to those. There's nothing wrong with detection and response. I'm all big fan. You want to protect, at every different level, but the industry has to focus a lot more on preventative than they have in the past. It's the same thing with endpoints, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne. These people are doing a fantastic job at detection and response for looking for all these threat vectors. That's great, but hey, how about preventing it in the first place by stopping all this credential theft? Everybody knows that ransomware comes from account takeover and credential theft. I mean, the vast majority of it is caused by those kinds of intrusions. So let's stop that. Let's slam the door on all this account takeover stuff, close that whole attack vector down, and move on to other forms of security. Zero trust.
I agree.
Absolutely. I think, as it relates to development today, app development, what we've seen here, right, is that it's not just the person who's uploading their code. Today's applications are like kind of Frankensteins of a lot of third-party code, a lot of third-party components.
Open source.
And that is open source, whatever, right? And that's another place where, for instance, in the world of containers, right? I may have a container. There may be a very popular container that everyone uses for this particular function, and that container, and its payload is called ABC. And then someone else puts up a container called ABC1, but the one is, little, and people don't realize it, and they hit ABC1 instead of ABC, and they brought in malware.
That's right. ABC version 2. Oh, I want version 2.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got the latest one.
So, and again, if you have a means of verifying, not scanning the payload of the container, yes, you could do that. But it would be good if right off the bat we say, hey, wait a second, this isn't what it claims to be. This isn't from whom it purports to be or should be or it would be. And, it gets into this whole identity thing of not only people identity, but machine identity.
Machine identity, that's right.
Everything.
You have to have both. You have to have both. Yep.
No doubt about it.
Anyway, man, this is great. I mean, TJ, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
You've done this once or twice, but raising $100 million is still $100 million, right? And it's a decent amount of money. It'll allow you guys to continue on this mission.
Right.
We're very, very appreciative of our current investors who invested alongside, of course, and the new investors have come in. We can't be more appreciative because it gives us plenty enough funding that for the next 3 years, we just keep our head down, hire more great people, and keep putting out great product and adding great customers and not having to worry about going to the markets or what's going on, with the ups and downs of the external stock market's always a nice luxury to have when you're a startup. Focus
Absolutely.
on what we do, which is, do insanely great new technology that's going to really help change the lives of the companies that we partner with.
Yep. I don't know of anyone who's dying to play with the stock market right now.
No.
Anyway, who knows what's coming. TJ, congratulations. Thanks for the update. Hey, you know what? For people who want to get information on Beyond Identity, it's beyondidentity.com.
That's right. www.beyondidentity.com.
Perfect. Hey, congratulations. It's great seeing you. I know, well, you're down here in Florida usually where we are. Come visit us. Let's do something in person in studio next time.
Great. Great to see you again, Alan.
All right.
Be well.
Good luck.
Okay.
Be well.
Tom Germaluck, CEO Beyond Identity, raising $100 million to help remove the scourge of passwords. TJ, we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break.
We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up, Alan speaks with Eric Carter, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Sysdig, and Jim Armstrong, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing over at Snyk. And they talk about a container security partnership the two companies recently got themselves into. Together, they're integrating Sysdig Secure with Snyk Container to provide container security from development through operations. So Eric and Jim talk with Alan about what the partnership means to container security and the container security space, and what it means for the companies themselves. It's a great conversation, really interesting partnership. Let's go ahead and roll the conversation now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview segment here. I have two folks I want to introduce you to. One's been on our show a few times already, I think, in the past. One I've done webinars with, but I don't think I've ever brought him on Techstrong TV. Let me introduce you first to Eric Carter. Hey Eric, welcome. It's your first time on Techstrong TV.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks, Alan.
We always give extra points to people who have guitars in the background, man. So,
yeah, that's my cool
welcome.
factor, exactly.
Yeah, that gives you a little credit. Wait, was that a keyboard I saw when you moved there?
Yeah, man. It's
so you got two. Oh, double instruments. Good for you. Good, man. Eric, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hey, real simply, I am responsible for product marketing here at Sysdig that relates to our partnerships. Thus, here I am with Jim from Snyk.
Excellent. And you know what, Eric? We've interviewed so many people from Sysdig over the course of these last 2 years of COVID nonsense. But here on Techstrong TV. But there might be people who are not familiar with Sysdig still. Why don't, if you don't mind, before I introduce Jim, give him a quick Sysdig background.
Yeah, sure. Our goal is to help customers can securely and confidently run their cloud native and cloud applications. And so what we do is provide the visibility and security that helps them do that. And you'll hear a little bit about how that's tapping into Snyk in just a minute.
Cool, man. And then Jim, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us. So I run product marketing here at Snyk and specifically handle our Snyk container product, which is, obviously a key part of this integration and this partnership. So really excited about that.
Yep. And I should mention it's Jim Armstrong.
Jim
from
Armstrong.
Sneak,
That's it.
right?
Yep.
Well, we like
You
to
got
give you the full name. Your parents, your significant others may be watching this. It's big for them.
So guys, we I guess we kind of let the cat out of the well. Our audience is very familiar with Sneak, but why? Maybe someone's not. Maybe we need.
Yep.
Maybe they think, but they're not sure. Jim, why don't you give them a little Sneak background?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sneak is a developer-focused security company. So, Eric mentioned securely running the applications. We're focused very much on the far left side of that, as far left as you can get, and how those applications get built, and helping the developer secure the code, the containers when they're creating them, and those kinds of things very early in that process.
Excellent. All right. So we've got you both on. If our audience hasn't guessed already, and you guys have alluded to it, we've got a little collaboration going on here. Who wants to lead off telling us what's happening?
Yeah, I'll take it.
You're going to make me pick?
Yeah.
Eric, you go first. Go ahead. Why they pay me the big bucks? I make those.
Yeah, you want me to go first? I'll lead it off. Look, one of the things that we both from Sneak's perspective and our perspective, we hear from customers all the time. Hey, we want these solutions, the developer and the running to integrate better together, right? We need a better workflow. So we're responding to that by kind of creating this partnership to one, kind of make sure that customers have a complete solution when they're thinking, because like the lines have been blurred in the world of containers between devs and ops and security people. And so by coming together, we're providing kind of this entire spectrum. And then we didn't stop there, which is, something we'll talk about, which is we're actually able to use the strength of Systics, the leader in runtime security, helping the leader in development security by providing feedback that helps to address vulnerabilities in a more effective way. And Jim can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's 100% true. So the big sort of dirty secret on containers is you run a vulnerability scan and you get this spreadsheet that's hundreds of vulnerabilities long, and I'm not sure anybody really wants to or likes to deal with any of that. And I think for a developer, it's really hard to even sort of figure out how to deal with that. So we've been integrated into that process really early. But the great thing about this partnership and this integration with Sysdig is we get those runtime signals and feed those back to the developer. So the developer can see exactly, what things are the most important parts of their container, and what things need to be fixed first. So that's, in my geeky view, the most exciting, piece of this.
So let me see if I can give people a layman's kind of overview here. And keep in mind, right, I started a company that was doing vulnerability management in 2005. So I know a little bit about this stuff. You're right. Container vulnerability scanning is even... Our vulnerability solution at the company I used to work for was called VAM, Vulnerability Assessment Management. We found out that our customers used to call it the bad news generator. Because it was a bad news generator, right? You would scan your network, and like you said, you get a telephone book of things that needed to get done, and it made work for people. Back then, it only made work for security people because the developers, that wasn't their problem, right? It was already deployed. No one scanned pre-deployment. What were we thinking? Containers exasperate that because when we scan for containers, we're scanning container configuration, right? Whether that's a Kubernetes or whatever you're using, the configuration of these containers and the stack they're running in, and then we're scanning payload of the container. Right, and you have an application that's distributed over dozens of containers with a little payload in each of them, and then it's not just the payload in that container, but how does the payload in this container interact with the payload in that container, and does that create some sort of dependency or vulnerability? It's a nightmare. It's hard, right? Yeah. Sneak does a really good job of it. What I'm hearing though is now Sneak or Snick. Sneak and Sysdig. Sysdig does a really good job of that, I might add. Not Sneak. Sneak works with developers. But now developers using Sneak will be able to get feedback loops from Sysdig scanning and helping them make heads or tails and prioritize, right? What we're seeing in these, I'm going to imagine it's the container payloads, not the container configs. Or is it both? Eric, that might be a thing you can answer.
It really is looking at, we identify the container, but we also identify, what's actually running. I was thinking about this morning, right? And our approach is we're observing everything happening in the running environment. We do that at the system call level, which people that know Sysdig know that's our claim to fame. Our founder, Loris, helped create this solution. And he likens it to like a security camera, right? So by having that security camera, we're able to actually see, like, let's say we see the car approaching, we can see not just the car, we see who's driving the car. And in this case, right, we're able to actually pass that information back. Like the passengers are fine. What we really need to check is who that driver, right? And so in this case, we can get a container with a bunch of stuff that's in it, but they're not really doing anything. So if the vulnerability is in an active package, that's what you want to fix first. Now, in our testing, initial testing, one of the examples, it's like there's 1,000 vulnerabilities in this container. Snyk does a good job of saying, to get rid of most of these, you can upgrade to this container-based image. Then you click this execute button, and it says, these are the things that actually run in the environment. So we went from like 1,000 to like 3 that you really needed to pay attention to. So think about that percentage. It's like we've seen up to 95% reduction in noise, which is really, developers are going to be really excited when they can turn this on.
That's huge. I got news here. Not only developers are going to be really excited, the security people will be really excited too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not job security. No, security people are getting fired because there's a lack of vulnerabilities in the world. You know what I mean? But just having less vulnerabilities that are front and center, that are hot.
Mm-hmm.
Is a huge help to them as well. And and Jim, this is sort of new ground, if you will, for Snyk, because when we think of Snyk, we think about really pre-deployment developer security for the most part, right? And now we're moving into a post-deployment feedback loop situation, which is a bit of an expansion, if you will. So how are we doing this? Is this via APIs? Is there some like formal one-off sort of integration between the two? Is there a common interface? What are plans maybe going forward for interface and integration? I'll let the both of you chime in.
Yep. Yeah, we're essentially sharing information. So both Snyk and Sysdig are going to be in your Kubernetes clusters. That's a natural byproduct of using Snyk and Sysdig anyway. But when we're both in the cluster, we can recognize the fact that the other one is there and we exchange that information. So it's really, from a customer's perspective, setting this up it's not hard. There's nothing special or extra or additional that they need to do that's complicated to make this work. They just talk to each other and share that information. If you're a Snyk user, then you've got your Snyk results that you see anyway. You just get this extra bit of metadata, that executed box that Eric talked about, which basically just knocks out all the noise, the stuff that you don't have to worry about. So as far as an interface goes, wherever developer sees the Snyk results, which isn't always, in fact, probably is not often in the Snyk UI, they probably see it in other tools that they're using. But wherever they see those results, they can just filter that right straight down to the things that are being executed. So really nice and simple setup and integration of these two.
And Alan, you mentioned the security people. Now imagine a security person who's now saying, hey, I've looked at your reports and there's all these vulnerabilities. Well, the developer and the security person can now be able to say, hey, no, but look, these are the ones that are actually running. These are the real threats. We want to address as many vulnerabilities as possible, but doesn't it make sense, right, to address the ones that actually get invoked at runtime? And that's as simple as this is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a huge help, I think, for security, because it's the burden for this often falls on security's shoulders to go through that long list of vulnerabilities and for them to try and figure out which are these are the ones we should tell developers to focus on and what are we going to open tickets for. And, this can take a lot of that work, I think, right out of the way. So this is going to be great for them.
And look, one of the headlines, Alan, was that we are helping the developers, DevOps, DevSecOps, SecOps, call them what you want, that these folks can now, I guess, more, work better together because there's kind of a shared set of information and data, and obviously the more we fix and then it runs, there's less issues for the DevOps or DevSecOps people to chase down. So that's what we mean by not just having this integration, but providing that complete kind of coverage and picture for these organizations.
Sure. So, couple of things. So when you say they're sharing information within, let's say, the Kubernetes environment, what how exactly are they sharing it?
When I refer to that, I'm referring to that we've discovered this information, that we're making it available via API. Sneak's
so it is. It's an API direct from
absolutely.
From
they come by and periodically check that.
Right.
And hey,
it's not information hanging out in the ethosphere, that someone else.
No.
It's not meant for everyone to see, obviously.
It all happened. We're both great partners with cloud providers like AWS. It all will happen in your AWS environment or wherever you're running it. And so, it's a kind of a direct connection, as Jim said, when we're both installed and instrumented for that Kubernetes environment.
Absolutely. Jim, I mentioned this is a bit of an expansion for Sneak. We're recording this by the time it plays, but of course, Sneak announced a further expansion into the cloud today with the acquisition of Fugue. And I'm just wondering, it makes sense to me, does this play in there somehow, right? Helping, again, the more the better, the more the merrier when it comes to cloud security, certainly. Does this have any kind of play in that? Does this integration?
Yeah, I think it underscores exactly what you said, which is customers want that breadth of security and support, and they want to see the vendors like Sneak and Sysdig integrate and share information for the right audiences. I think our strengths are, as is independent companies, are we're very dev first, very dev focused, and that's where this Fugue integration acquisition is very focused on that. And I think Sysdig is clearly a leader in the runtime security, behavioral analytics, incident response, and forensics, and a number of other categories too. And so I think it definitely shows off that breadth and sort of underscores what customers want. And I think this partnership is a great signal for that, for sure.
Yeah, I think it reemphasizes our mission, Jim, which is, really broadening the context and what's available. And like you said, starting with our open source project Falco, which Alan, I think you're aware of, that is the underpinnings of what we do with Sysdig Secure, which is what we've integrated with Sneak Container. And that's that real-time behavioral analysis that we're known for. That's a part of this. And the more tooling you can get to broaden the visibility and security is really it's great.
So guys, I did biz dev for a really long time, so I know my strategic partnerships like this. No one does just a one-off, right? There's got to be a phase 2, a phase 3, big plans down the road. What comes next for this partnership?
I think right now, where this first part of the partnership is super exciting to us. We've had a few briefings with some customers ahead of time, and all of them are super interested in what we're building here. So I think we're excited to get this first one out the door. To your point, though, I think we're excited to hear what customers see and what customers say about this, and explore what we do next. So it's definitely been. I know from Sneak's perspective, this has been a fantastic partnership. It's been great working with the Sysdig team for the last couple of months on this and getting prepared for this. And it feels like a much different partnership than others I've experienced, not just at Sneak, but lots of other companies before. So it's a really unique opportunity, I think, for both of us.
And Alan, there is a lot of talk about culture and company culture, and I think this has been a good marriage, if you will. And it even goes to the top, right? Like the Peter McKay, the CEO of Sneak, and Sres Vasudevon have worked together in previous life. So it's almost like a natural fit down to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. Hey guys, for audience, maybe you want to find out more about this integration, more about this partnership. I imagine it's both on the Sneak and Sysdig websites. Where could just go to the front page of like sneak.com or sysdig.com and look under news, or where do you find this?
Yeah, exactly. Like right on our front page today, there's the blog that we've written. You can get to the PR. We have a partner page, and then all of that links directly to what Jim has written about the partnership on sneak.com or sneak.io. Pardon. Yeah.
Sneak.io.
It's my fault. Sneak.io. You're right.
Cool. Well, guys, congratulations. This sounds like a great partnership, and the real winners are the people out here watching this, right? Developers and security folks who, we're looking to make lives easier and be more productive and, stop the bad news generators. I wish you both success. Come back and keep us posted. Okay, guys?
You bet.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
All right, Jim Armstrong, Eric Carter here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we're back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, Mike Jones is speaking with Mary Galloway, who is the CEO and a founding board member for the Women's Society of Cyberjitsu. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing more women and girls into cyber and underrepresented communities as well. Mary was a guest of mine a couple months ago, and now she's talking to Mike about what her organization is doing and how it's helping close the diversity gap, and actually the gender gap as well. So it's a great conversation. This is part one of a two-part conversation that the two of them have. So let's go ahead and roll the first one now.
Welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast number, let's just do February .1. This is the first episode this month. And today we have Mary Galloway on, who is a friend of a friend and has a really interesting story. I met her electronically through Techstrong TV, who promotes and replays the Haunted Hacker podcast 3 times a week on Digital Anarchist. So I'm sure it's going to be an interesting time and a lot of fun. So before we get started, I'll talk about some news. Right now I'm scheduled to speak tentatively in Frankfurt, Germany in May at the Cloud Security Conference Summit. Also with ICE sometime in the next month or two. And a lot of podcasts are going on. I'll be on Simon's webcast, sponsored by Valor, and a few others coming up. So without further ado, I'll introduce Mary Galloway. And Mary, I'm so glad you're here. It's a pleasure having you on the show. I've heard a lot about you. Good things, of course.
Hopefully.
Yeah, right. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, and I won't spoil the excitement, and we can just launch right into it.
Awesome. So hello, everybody. My name is Mary Galloway. Happy to be here. Calling in, dialing in, zooming in from sunny Las Vegas. I've been in cybersecurity and tech for over 12 years. I got my start as a network engineer for a company called Accenture, working on some of their government contracts. I used to drive 53 miles one way to get to that job.
Wow, committed.
Yeah, from Southern Maryland to Ashburn, Virginia.
Wow.
And it sucked. If you've ever been in that area, you know traffic over there is just awful.
No way.
So I got my start as a network engineer. One of my first big projects was doing out-of-band management for NGA, which is the National Geospatial Agency. They were moving from all of their different locations in the DC area to one location in Springfield. And so we managed that transition for them. I almost quit that job because they wouldn't let me touch the equipment because I was new. But, it worked out. I stayed there for a while. Then I ended up moving to North Carolina, Fort Bragg to be specific. And that's when I got my first taste of true cybersecurity information assurance work. I was responsible for managing the entire high side network for the Army. Nice. And making sure that all of those Cisco routers and switches were configured correctly, not VLAN 1, but VLAN 3 type stuff. And
what year was that?
This was 2011.
Okay. So I did basically the same thing for USJFCOM in Virginia.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So,
nice.
Yeah,
we probably talked back then.
I'm sure.
So did that, went into helping build out an insider threat program for the Department of the Army. That was kind of cool. That was my first interactions with ArcSight. So if people are familiar with ArcSight, they've been, replaced by some other SIMs nowadays. And then I moved back to the DC area and started working for Homeland Security, working for there was different directorates that I worked in, from requirements gathering to analyzing network traffic for all of the different agencies for the government, mostly in the DC area. Met up with ArcSight again then, did a little incident response for them, and then I moved out to Las Vegas to help build out a vulnerability management team. Left the government, left DC, and haven't looked back since. It's been one of those great experiences of moving from public sector to private sector, and just the growth and the money and the opportunities. They're so plentiful on this side of things. And now I work for Palo Alto Networks, working on SOAR automation, helping customers once they've made the purchase. I help them implement it and get it set up and running and help them start to realize their ROI for getting the product.
Nice. I actually work a lot with SOAR in the MDR that I manage. So I guess it's safe to say that you're from DC originally?
Not really. My folks are military. They're retired. But we spent a lot of time in that area. So I do know a number of people. Both my mom and my stepdad are both in that area still. So I loved it there before the traffic, before the construction, before everybody moved. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I saw the Redskins shirt, and
I know I'm trying to hide it because they changed the name.
It did. They're called what? The Commanders now, or something?
The Commanders. And it's like, oh my gosh, I was a little bit hurt, when I heard it the other day, and I was just like, could we have just kept the Washington football team? But it is what it is.
I'm actually from DC myself. I was born at Walter Reed.
Okay.
My dad was working at the NSA when I was born.
Nice.
So kind of born into the community, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Served some time in the military and intelligence, and then became a DoD contractor. So our paths are fairly similar.
Yeah. Okay. Where are you located now?
I'm actually in Chattanooga, Tennessee now. I moved back from London last year and ended up landing here in Chattanooga.
Nice.
Big difference between Chattanooga and London, but
yes. Less rain.
Less rain. Yeah, true. And the tea is worse here. The tea was actually really good over there, but
well, it's American tea. What do you expect, right? You have to get it imported in.
I did exactly that. So yeah, Las Vegas. I'm actually doing work with Alyssa Knight out in Las Vegas. Writing screenplays for her. My first screenplay will be out next month. She's already shot the film and everything. So there's a lot of cybersecurity out in Vegas. I know that you worked at one of the casinos as well, didn't you?
I did. I worked for the Venetian and the Palazzo. And it was an interesting experience because my friend was like, hey, let's move to Vegas and go work. And I was like, Vegas, it's like 150 degrees in the summer and super cold in the winter. Why would I do that? And I was like, they don't have cybersecurity, right? Not really thinking,
right?
like in the sense of cybersecurity, right? And it was like, wait a minute, they have whole SOCs out here and whole like teams of folks that do all of the same things that other organizations have. And so I highly recommend it. I think it's a really cool place to get some experience and get into cybersecurity.
Absolutely. The environment is much different. The risk level and the acceptable risk level is different. I've done a lot of pen tests in casinos, and the gaming floor and the business offices and the hotels. It's a really interesting mixture of architecture.
Yes.
So you also are an author, and you have a 501c3.
Yes.
That you have. Why don't you talk to me about the charity that you do?
So I'm one of the founding board members, and I currently run the Women's Society of Cyberjitsu, aka Cyberjitsu. So if you see it out there, and we provide hands-on training to women and girls looking to enter and advance in cybersecurity. We do hands-on workshops. We do courses to help you get prepped for certifications. We go to conferences together. We do cyber competitions. We love it. Wicked Six Cyber Games is coming. I have my friend Marcel, who's been pivotal in making a lot of the competition stuff we do work. She helps build these competitions for people. And it's just a way for us to get more women in cybersecurity, obviously, but also give them an opportunity to get hands-on and to get into the technology and not feel like they're alone in this space and that they can't do something, right? I get emails all the time like, oh my gosh, the workshop that I attended, it helped me land this job because I was able to talk about these kind of skills. And so that's what we do this for, to help them feel empowered to be successful.
Yeah, plus I think giving back to the community also helps further the community and keep the legacy going.
Yes.
I've interviewed a lot of people that have 501s that, basically the same, I guess, mentality and idea. I had Tanisha Williams on from Black Girls Hack. And I have to say that charity was really interesting and great people. Like, I've never met better people in my life. We had a really good time. Them and the group from DC that does the same thing for the communities there that, either they don't have enough money or they don't have the exposure to cybersecurity. I find those 501s really interesting. I'm actually diving off into starting my own 501 this year for veterans.
Don't do it.
No, don't do it.
No, I'm just joking.
It's scary. It really is scary when you look at the amount of stuff that has to go into it, legal counsel and all the legal paperwork. It's overwhelming. And at the same time, I'm trying to start an LLC for consulting as well. So it's just a lot at once. But I think it's important for us in cybersecurity to, the leadership that's been there for a long time, to not just, get to those twilight years and be like, okay, well, I'm done, and not leave anything behind to help people out. So the competition you guys have, kind of mixing hacking cybersecurity with esports, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because that really intrigues me.
So that was, we hosted the first Wicked Six in Vegas at the HyperX Arena. And the idea behind it was to showcase cyber athletes, right? Because if you want to be successful, you have to train, right? And it's the same concept with if you're playing basketball, if you're running track, if you're playing football, whatever, you have to train for that big day. And so mixing smaller missions for people to watch and pay attention to versus the ones that are like 4 days. Nobody's going to sit and watch. People will. But really, if you want to learn about something, you're not going to sit and watch somebody try to hack at things at like a DEF CON, right? Because you're not going to understand what they're doing because they're high level. So we brought it back down to a level that people could understand. Brought in shoutcasters, brought in interviewers to interview some of the players and just talk about what they're learning. And then you can actually watch them on stage with the big screen at the HyperX Arena doing the fixing the vulnerabilities or looking for ways to figure out how to get into this system or that system. And it was a really cool experience. And so the one that's coming up is for women only, 1,000 women over 24 hours from around the world.
So I'm not getting an invite?
Now you can totally come and watch. I'm sure we'll put you in there. But it's just a way to bring exposure to cybersecurity careers, to gaming, to the learning aspect of it. I mean, when I did my first competition, I think Marcel was on the team with us, and I had no clue what I was doing, but it was fun, right? Because I was in a group of other folks that kind of knew what they were doing, but didn't know either.
That's awesome.
And we could collaborate, and that's what we try to bring to others that are looking to do the same thing.
That's really cool, and it's really neat how cybersecurity is starting to blend into those types of events, because I think it's really important to embrace like not only just the younger generations, but also the gaming side of it. Yes. Because it really is a game. It's a lot of money involved when it comes to real life, but it's definitely a game of cat and mouse, right?
Yes.
So I'm a really big fan of that. And actually, there was a group that contacted me from London last week to be on the Hacker Hunter Docu-Series. And it's about gaming.
Nice.
It's about gaming.
Okay.
So
that's cool. Check that out.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, and I think Netflix. But they have a lot of really interesting docu-series, and a lot of people that I'm sure have been on previous episodes. So there's a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of innovative stuff going on in the space right now. It's really exciting for me because I get to bounce from conference to conference and kind of peek my head in and see what's going on. And
that's the fun part. So
yeah, for sure. So Charlene. What's your connection with Charlene?
So what's her last name?
O'Hanlon.
Yeah. How do we meet? I don't even remember how we met. I get so many emails and people are like, hey, I think what you're doing is really cool. I think it's great. And I think we were just connected because of the InfoSec Institute partnership that we just announced, and we're getting ready to work on some more activities and things with them to kind of bring some more awareness to the partnership and to the training that they have and the scholarships that they offer. But that's how I ended up meeting her, and I was just like, oh, she's really cool. I like her. Just like that when I grow up.
I got an email from her, and she was like, I've got this person you did to interview. She's great. And she sent me your name, and I was like, I know her. So, I mean, it's a small community. People don't understand that cybersecurity is a huge industry, but really the people at the core, it's a very small group of people.
Yes.
And we're all separated.
2 degrees of separation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's not much separation at all. So yeah, I was really excited to have you on the show, and I started like digging through your background and doing my OSINT.
What did you find that's not cyber related?
I didn't go into personal life or anything. I just tried to look at the different connections we had as far as like our career path and stuff like that. So what made you get into cybersecurity? What was the thought, the breaking point that said, I want to be in cybersecurity?
So I actually, before I went to school for IT and tech, I was actually an architecture student. So typically I'll have Legos behind me because I like to build things. But since I'm moving my office, I don't have it in here yet. But technology-based stuff with architecture, but I switched my focus to just regular technology. And I was like, okay, well, what do I want to do? I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I took the network engineering job. And during that job, I went to Security Plus boot camp. And this dude named Joe McCrae, he was teaching the ethical hacker training. He came into the classroom and showed us router configurations on the internet. And I was like, wait, and it was in plain text. And I was like, oh, that's not good.
That's awesome.
So that kind of steered me towards maybe I need to go this route. And, I wanted to be a pen tester at one point in my life. Then I was like, yeah, I'm over that. I'll just do this stuff over here. But that's kind of how that got started. And so I didn't actually get to start doing it until I was working at Fort Bragg and interacting with DISA-STIGs and having to make sure that all those configurations, they freaking sucked. But I was a master at it. I had a script and everything. So like copy paste.
Yep.
But accreditations and certifications. And then when that contract ended, I ended up getting my actual first cybersecurity job at DHS.
Cool. So, yeah. Me and DHS, I did a talk for them last month or the month before. We haven't always been friends, but because of my background, but
Okay,
we're on speaking terms now. We've been divorced for a while, and we're finally making up. I look at some of the kids coming into the industry, and I say kids, I mean, they're young adults, but their aspirations, it seems to be everybody wants to be a pen tester first.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't know if that's media driven or if it's just that chance to kind of dance on the edge legally.
I think it's media driven.
Yeah.
And I think there aren't enough places that show, hey, you can do all of these things in cybersecurity, and they all are sexy and fun and cool and can have that same effect. We get women all the time that'll come through and it's like, I want to be a pen tester. It's like, okay, well, why? It's like, well, did you look at this and this and this over here? And they're like, oh, wait. And then like, oh, I think I want to go on the blue team side now, or I think I want to go on the governance and risk side of things, or I think I want to go on the sales engineering side of things. And so I think it's a lack of awareness, and all the TV shows show the people hacking, they make it look cool, And so it's like, oh, I can do that. I want to do that.
And it's really interesting too. The media portrays like hackers as like this really sexy thing with the bells and whistles and neon green text falling off the screen and shit.
Right.
But what they don't show, and it kind of frustrates me, is diversity is one.
Right.
There's very little to no diversity in media when it comes to hacking in general. They usually show some tattooed guy like me, with a hoodie on, sitting behind a computer, and that's not what it always is,
Exactly.
But what I do find interesting is before I got into security, like legal security, I was on the other side, and I was learning the offensive stuff. And I think I tell all my analysts that are in the MDR with me is that to make a truly proficient, analyst or a pen tester, you have to know both sides.
Yes.
And so I encourage them to go out and get offensive security certs as well as blue team certs.
Yep.
Because to me, if you're sitting behind a computer and you're looking at, let's say, Darktrace or throw any name of app in there, and you see alerts coming across, all you see is the back end of it.
Right.
And I tell people that if you really want to stop what's going on, you have to know how it starts.
Yep. You have to know how they got in, how they even, managed to get social engineer themselves into the space.
Exactly.
What vulnerabilities do you have out there that allowed this to happen, and understanding how to fix that?
Exactly. And I think it's great that you open up the different principles to security so that people understand there's not just pen testing and there's not just, defensive stuff. There's all kinds of stuff involved. When I got to USJFCom, this is what put me back on the red team, was a year at USJFCom working in the C&D cell. It was DISA gold disk and EI retina and routine password checks. Like,
dude,
it was so monotonous that I thought I was going to die in that place. It was horrible. But it gave me an idea as to what I really wanted to do. And I've been back and forth. I'll lead a red team for a year, and then I'll jump over and help somebody build a SOC. But I just love cybersecurity. Yeah.
Yeah. And that helps you keep your skills up. One, absolutely. Plus you're able to bring, that exposure and that experience from the other side to the table when it comes time to do that.
Yeah. And I think that it takes different mindsets as well. Like, for someone to truly have a passion in red teaming, not hacking, but true red team,
right? Not
just point and click script kiddie. I'm using Metasploit. Boom, I got a shell. I'm talking like really analyzing code and really getting in deep and getting your hands into it. I think that is kind of I think it's a mindset that you're kind of born with. And defense is sort of the same thing. Those are usually your more empathetic people who want to help people, who want to give back. I've seen nurses go from hospitals to SOCs to do defense.
Awesome. Yeah, because they have that mindset. Yeah.
So do you see a lot of that? Do you see a lot of cross industry into cybersecurity?
Yes. A number of our members are career changers. They come in, from like accounting, business, library, InfoSec Sherpa. She was a librarian turned cybersecurity analyst, because those skills definitely work over there. And so we see a lot of, because they see the opportunity, right? They see the money. And they see that, hey, I don't have to work 50 hours, 60 hours, 70 hours a week all the time, and so we definitely will get that. And the fact that they have that different mindset, they can think differently, they can bring in those skills, it helps the teams that they're on.
Yeah, absolutely. The only bad thing I think about having so many facets to cybersecurity is if someone really has a passion for cybersecurity, it's really easy to burn out.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you do to help keep yourself from getting to that point where you're burned out? Because you do a lot of stuff.
I take breaks and I have a lot of wine. We make wine here in Las Vegas. And so we make it every season, and we keep a stash of wine on hand. But no, when I start to feel like I'm going down that path of burning out, because it happens regularly. I think I had burnout something last summer, right? It's COVID, and we're trying to still make sure we're getting activities out to people and still do other stuff and still work my day job. And then I have a business that I run as well. You have to just take a step back.
Yeah.
And that's when self-care comes in, whether that's making wine, whether that's, I build Legos. I have the Titanic Lego set sitting out there
awesome.
on the table. It's not open yet. I have to finish my project downstairs, but I try to find ways to release, home projects. I crochet, I cross stitch, typical old lady stuff, right? But it helps me take my mind away from the day in and day out of cybersecurity stuff. And then it helps me refresh, and I can come back to it later on and not feel so burned out.
Right. And I think a lot of it comes to is that when you first get into the industry, and let's say you don't necessarily have a name for yourself and you're trying to make your path, it's almost like overnight you end up in a place where you look at, I guess, newspaper articles or talks that you've given and realize that you're moving into a different segment of cybersecurity.
Yes. Yeah.
And it happens so quick that you're not ready for all of, I guess, the talks or the interviews or the projects. And then all of a sudden you're wrapped into it and you get stuck and you're like, wait a minute, what do I do for myself now? Do I still have my own identity?
Exactly. I actually, to be honest with you, right before COVID, I was starting to go through that. And I was like, wait, I got to find time for me. And then COVID happens.
Right.
And then I think stuff picked up. It's like, hey, I need you to speak on this. Hey, I need you to speak this. It's like, wait a minute. It's virtual now. I get it, but I don't want to speak every week.
Oh, and it happens. It happens.
And it happens because we're virtual. It's easier just to jump on here, do the presentation, and then keep it moving. And you could do that every single day of the week.
Yeah.
It's like, you got to say no sometimes. And people are afraid to say no. I was afraid to say no for the longest. And I say no now. I'm like, I give you somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hardest part for me is I feel like if someone says, hey, I want you to be in this film, or, hey, I want you to speak here, or, write this or do that. I feel like if I say no, then I'm risking being relevant, and maybe I won't get that call again.
Yep.
And it's so bad because you have that thought, but then also like imposter syndrome. Like, why do they want me to talk there? It's a battle.
It's definitely a battle. And I think everybody faces it.
Oh, yeah.
My friend the other day, he was like, go look at your LinkedIn and then tell yourself, would you hire that person? And that's how you can sit back and relax, because you've done all of the things and you're making an impact, and you don't have to continuously be deep in the weeds anymore because you've gotten to that point. And I was just like, you know what? That's a really good point. You have to coach yourself.
Yeah. It's definitely that self-care. When you get to, and there's ups and downs too, right? So I've gone through a lot of, building groups and watching things fail. At the same time, watching things succeed. But one thing I learned, like I was a true perfectionist when it came to fear of failure. But I finally had to embrace the fact that I can't be successful unless I'm able to let myself fail as well.
Right.
And a lot of people don't get that getting in cybersecurity. Like some analysts will get an alert and let's say they miss the analysis. They're totally way off. I've seen analysts like go into a depression over it. I'm like, look, you're gonna fail. I want you to fail. I want you to ask questions.
Exactly.
That's how we all
grow.
learn. Right.
That's how you learn.
But I think there's a lot of people in cybersecurity that are very much the perfectionists. And I think our industry attracts a lot of that too.
And I think social media plays a big part in that.
Oh, huge. Because
everybody has this, if you have somebody posted today on Twitter, should companies hire folks based on their follower count? I said, what? Wait, what? Their follower
contest.
Do you realize that half the folks that have these big followings probably don't do anything? Like, they're not the experts, but they're seen as the expert. They're seen as the people that we should follow, but we don't really know their true story and how they got to that place.
And that's dangerous.
Exactly. So now everybody that's coming behind them, they're like, oh my God, I have to do all of these things all at once so that I can be relevant and be, at the forefront of things. It's like, you don't have to do all that.
Right.
If you want to, you can, right? But you don't have to fill your 24 hours up with something every single day.
Yeah. And social media tends to be a cancer when it comes to cybersecurity because there's so much misinformation.
Yes.
And there's so many people that have a voice that shouldn't.
That should not.
Yes.
Like,
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech Conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the Predict 2020 virtual event we had a couple months ago. This is a presentation by Damon Edwards, who was the Senior Director of Product over at PagerDuty. His presentation is titled, You Build It, You Run It, Hits Its Stride in the Enterprise. He highlights why high-performing companies are moving toward that You Build It, You Run It operating model, how they're doing it, and why everyone should be paying attention to this trend. It is a great presentation. Let's roll it now.
Hello, everybody. I want to say thank you to Alan and the whole Techstrong team for having me. They asked my prediction for 2022, what's gonna happen. And I think this is the year that the You Build It, You Run It finally hits its stride in the enterprise, right? Not just the purpose-built companies that kind of work this way from the beginning, but these sort of large shops that have had decades of success that they've had to drag along with them. So let's get into it. Oh, by the way, I work for PagerDuty. This is my own personal prediction, but you can come over to our PagerDuty or hit me up on Twitter if you want to learn more about what we're doing. So, Werner Vogels, the CTO of AWS, he was the one that I think really coined or promoted this term, you build it, you run it, right? The idea that the dev and the ops part of the life cycle of a service should be owned by the same team, right? Full life cycle ownership is another way to put it out there. And really the idea behind this is kind of self-evident, which is, speed and flexibility, right? So if a team owns its own destiny, right? Think about how fast they can move, right? They're not dependent on somebody else to catch and run what they've built. Likewise, the learning from the people who catch it and run it, gets back to the team who builds it, and you get this virtual fast cycle. And as we learn that, speed is a huge competitive advantage. The other interesting part is flexibility, right? That we can create organizations that are decoupled, which leads to more speed. But it's not just speed in terms of pure throughput, but speed in terms of our ability to react, right? Our ability to scale up, scale down as an organization, attack new problems, reassemble ourselves, right? So really, this idea of speed and flexibility is quite tantalizing from a business perspective. But we're talking about the enterprise, but what happened, right? So we saw some early adventures into you build it, you run it. Didn't quite go so well, right? It was more like you build it, you run it, but everybody runs away, right? It kind of falls back to the old, throw it over the wall. People get retasked onto new projects. Where we incentivize people to get to production, to launch something, right? Not quite so much for optimizing as it runs. So things didn't really change. And another thing happened is you build it, you run it, but it's kind of the over my dead body, right? Compliance, governance, whether it be for management reasons, I don't want to keep those people out of my production environment, or it's for, regulatory reasons or security compliance reasons. This idea of we spent all this time hardening our world and only letting a select few, pre-screened people into this environment. Now we're going to let all of these other folks into these environments where there might be customer data or, controlled systems. That just, that seems a bit crazy. So we run into a lot of roadblocks there. And there's the old, oh crap, we ran out of people, right? We decided to go this path. We had a meeting, right? And in about 10 minutes into the meeting of looking through these services over who's going to own them, we just ran out of people, right? We had this sprawl of systems that we built over various generations of people, either it be acquisition or by organic growth. But we just can't figure out how do we take the people we have and the boxes of parts that we have, or the box of doorknobs, as some folks call it, and align them all up, right? We just are running out of people there. And, the kind of last one here is, the other sort of thing we saw people run into is this whole idea of, everything I need is stuck in ticket queues, right? This idea that the request cycles of an organization, didn't work in this way that, people just free-flowing work, but we had ticket queues everywhere, right? We have work queues everywhere that our work is being stuck in. So fundamentally, how people work, how people plan their work, how people assign work, everything is sort of in these queues, right? So this high idea of you build it, you run it, and all the benefits that can come from it, sort of hit this buzzsaw in the enterprise. And we saw a lot of folks that went down this path and then aborted, right? So what's different in 2022, right? Why is this going to be the year that you build it, you run it, hits it big in the enterprise, right? Or kind of gains that acceptance? Well, it's really three areas I want to talk about today, right? These are different movements, different forces that are finally, or different tracks of evolution that are coming together to make you build it, you run it a reality. And it's maturing cloud native platforms and tools, observability coming into focus. And the third one, which I'm really going to focus most of my time on, is how the DevOps and SRE movements have fundamentally transformed operations, or are transforming operations, and how that unlocks all of this possibility. So let's start with the first one, right? Maturing cloud native platforms and tools. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this. I'm sure there's got to be, haven't seen the rest of the predictions. There's got to be enough, service mesh and Kubernetes and other tooling, talks here. But I think, fundamentally, this is a major trend, right? That the cloud native platforms, really have arrived. People are, we see the production usage of these tools, and really the key part about it is, we're giving people a framework to work within to say, if you describe your world in this way, and if you work within these primitives of these systems, when it comes time to operate, this stuff will work, right? This stuff will compose itself, it'll fix itself, and it'll keep itself in that same state that you described it, right? So it's sort of turning the full stack into code, right? We saw the early infrastructure as code movement. This is really turning the entire application stack into code, which is not so much the code's the interesting part. It's the fact we can treat it like an SDLC. We can put an SDLC around this. We can treat the whole thing like composable software, right? So composable software through an SDLC into a framework that keeps itself in that state, and we can define certain kind of predefined behaviors like scaling up, scaling down, that sort of that sort of thing. So this is an important evolution that's really for the first time giving that common ground between people with dev concerns and people with ops concerns, right? And we started with the DevOps movement, is it 15, 16, maybe more years ago, right? It was the idea that if, dev and ops showed up at the same conference, one of the two were at the wrong event, right? That's how different our worlds were. Now we're talking about, we've built this whole universe really of platforms and tools that allow us to have that common language, those common building blocks and primitives all around operating software. So exciting stuff. A side note here, what I think is also coming up in 2022 when it comes to these platforms is there's a new challenge, right? Which is going to be managing the self-inflicted complexity, right? That we've caused for ourselves here, right? So I'm sure you've all seen this Death Star diagram of, I think it was Dartmouth came up with this tool that visualizes the communication paths between microservices, and down below we've got the folks at Sumo Logic like to talk about this, where the expanding tech stack, expanding number of components, this data deluge that we've created from all these services, the rapid pace of change, these broadening attack surfaces. So I think this, while the maturity of these cloud native platforms is allowing us to do new and great things in 2022, we still got to watch out for this new problem we're creating, which is more complexity. But let's assume someone else is going to tackle that in their talk. So I think what's also new here is if you're going to do a you build it, you run it, which is fundamentally saying that, hey, you build it, you run it, that you need to give people the ability to not only do things, right, to actually control the things that they've created, but the ability to actually observe the things that they've created, right? And here we've seen the observability movement really mature and come to the forefront. And I think what's interesting, I like the definition of observability, that's about interrogating the unknowns, right? Monitoring looks at things that we've looked at in the past. Hey, we've seen this before, so let's set this monitoring trap or monitor up to say, hey, is this going to happen again, right? But that's different if something's going wrong. How do we interrogate our system? How do we look at the things that we don't know, right? And some people have a beef with this definition of logging, metrics, and tracing, but I think it's a pretty simple way to think about, kind of what goes into, observability, right? Where it's, logging, how we look at the events, metrics, which are data points over time, right? Are things going up or going down? And then tracing, right? Looking at events in the context of something outside of it, right? Like a business request. How does it go across all of my services? And, how do these events all tie together? So, a lot of progress has gone on in observability in the last few years, but I think the big revelation is that it's not so much just the ability to put these observability tools or even monitoring tools into place, right? It's the ability that the real innovation is that it's distributed out for everybody else, right? And where in the past, monitoring, or what is now called observability, where domains are really the operations folks, right? They'd look at that and say, hey, what's going on here, right? If you want to know what's going on, you go to the ops team and you ping them on your chat, or you go walk down and look over their cube. Back in the days when we had cubes, had an office to go to, and you ask them what's going on, right? I think the real innovation is that you see what these observability tools. It's not as much what they're doing, although I think that's great, but it's the fact that it's for everybody else, right? It's distributing the ability to have visibility into the current performance and operability of your systems, right? And I think we see it going on with monitoring, we see it going on with observability, that ability to push that visibility to everyone, and also starting to see it now with governance. A very interesting thing as well too, that distributing, how do you do real-time governance of these kind of fast-moving and very complicated cloud systems. So that's the real, I think, innovation for observability, is it's really observability for everyone, right? An important part of the you build it, you run it. You can't have the do without the without the view, right? So moving on along here. So the third part here, which I think is really the key thing to focus on, what's really unlocking this for folks, right, is that we've seen the DevOps and SRE movements, right, and the things they've brought to operations, really transforming how folks think about operations work and how operations teams are even structuring themselves. Let's talk about kind of that journey and what's gone on there. So I think you have to go back and look sort of historically as what's happened. So, there's these forces that have always undermined operations work, right? And there's really four of them. I call them like the four horsemen of the operations apocalypse, right? And folks have heard me talk about these before, but low trust, right? Excessive toil, silos, and queues. These four kind of intrinsic forces that happen anywhere you have both planned and unplanned work comes together, right? And that's really an interesting part about operations is it's really, the idea that unplanned work and planned work lives together under the same charter of the same team. It's a pretty rare thing if you think about how businesses work in general. Usually there's a planned work teams, there's unplanned work teams, but operations has to live in the middle, and these forces continually just intrinsically seem to appear and affect how folks work. So let's go through these. So first one is low trust. What's that all about, right? If you think about it, where are decisions made in organizations, right? Who can actually take action? Often what we'll see is the context, what's going on, right, is often over all the way on the left, right? But where are decisions made? They're made all the way over on the right, right? Often they call like the hippo, right? The highest paid person in the room, or we need an escalation to somebody who has the authority to do it. We tend to put the lower skills, on the left, right? And the higher skills, we protect them over on the right. And we escalate off between them, right? So while decisions are made over there, the context of what's going on is made over on the left. And a key point is something that I love. This John Allspaw has done this at a few conferences where he says. John Allspaw of Etsy fame, and now he's also probably one of the most foremost researchers of operational activity or system safety. I think in the for large IT systems in the world, and he makes this point that all operations work is contextual, right? So he does this thing where he says, "Who thinks this is dangerous?" Right? RM-RF path name kind of makes you pucker up a little bit, right? Like, whoo, that could do some damage, right? But he's like, what if I told you that's just a little script that we run, a routine that we run that clears out some cache periodically, right? Suddenly, not so dangerous, not so puckering, right? And he goes, okay, what about this, right? This little diff statement here between these two files. We capitalize the K in OK, right? Is this change dangerous, right? And most people say no, right? Well, what if you said this is a health check for a load balancer, right? Suddenly we can break things. Suddenly this becomes dangerous, right? And the main point here is that the answer is always, it depends, right? All the work that we do is contextual, right? So where decisions being made, all the context is on the left, right? But yet we're trying to have people make decisions on the right. This is where we get a lot of conflict, right? And another way to think about trust is not just the who can make what decisions where, but also psychological safety is another key indicator of trust, right? And it's a very interesting concept because the idea that it's a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking, right? So, William Kahn here, a well-known researcher in this topic, said it can be defined as being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. And this isn't the newest concept, but Google did a study about what is the most important characteristic to predict team effectiveness. This is way back in 2016. And determined it was psychological safety, right? So it's not just, when it comes to trust, it's not just saying, hey, do we allow people closer to the problem to take action, people with the most context on the left versus making them escalate to the right, but also it's how do people act themselves? If they don't have that psychological safety, they're not going to want to take action. They're going to want to push it up the stream to other folks. So that's the trust issue that always pops up. The next one is this idea of excessive toil, right? And what's great is the SRE movement has kind of given us this name for a problem that we've always felt, and this is idea of toil, right? And I love Vivek Rao. He wrote the chapter in the Google's original SRE book. He says, toil is the kind of work tied to running a production service that tends to be manual, repetitive, automatable, tactical, devoid of enduring value, and scales linearly as a service grows, right? So basically what you're saying is it's that repetitive, work. And I really love this devoid of enduring value, right? It's maybe it's work we have to do, right? The system might fall over if we don't do it, but it's not adding value to the business. It's not moving things forward. It's like running on that work that we do day in, day out, that it feels like we're kind of running on a treadmill, right? And I think what's interesting to balance this to the opposite of this was engineering work, right? That, toil, it lacks that enduring value. Engineering work builds enduring value, right? Toil is rote and repetitive, right? It's the same thing kind of over and over again. Engineering work requires creativity. It's iterative, right? Toil tends to be tactical, engineering strategic. Toil increases with scale, and engineering enables scaling. This is an interesting point, right? Which is if your service goes from 1,000 users to 1 million users, right? What percent increase does this work toil increases with that, right? There's a linear increase along with the scale of the system, because more of this work we have to do to keep things running versus engineering work is a force multiplier, right? It should be, as we do it, we should be able to scale without adding more toil. And, toil can and probably should be automated versus engineering work requires human creativity. It's the stuff that computers are actually bad at, right? And, why this is so important is, and why this really undermines so many kind of operations organizations is if that toil, right, it is important to keep in balance with the engineering work, because the engineering work is good for two things. Number one, we can use it to improve the business, obviously. And number two, we can use it to reduce the toil, right? Now, if the toil becomes unmanageable, right? If it crowds out that engineering capacity, we're in this kind of engineering work bankruptcy, right? Where we don't have the capacity to move the business forward, and we don't have the capacity to even reduce the toil, we end up where everybody feels like they're working, at 110%, but nothing's really getting done, right? So this is why it's so important. And when you have all that interrupt-driven work of operations, and remember that operations is not just an organization anymore, it's now being spread throughout the organization. If we don't protect that engineering work, and by keeping that toil at bay, we're going to be, doing this downward spiral, right? That we see happen to a lot of operations organizations today. So the third force here that really undermines, operations work is this notion of silos, right? And some of the things, well, silos, teams, or aren't we always going to have teams? But the important thing is not the fact that there's teams; it's how people interact, right? If you think about it, within a very small enough organization or a single team, right? People work together. They have a single backlog, single set of contexts they're working with. They're using the tools all the same way. They've got a clear set of priorities. But anywhere, especially the enterprise, right? Nothing lives in isolation. It's always, I need something from somebody else. And here's where the silo effects start to come in, because that other team has their own priorities, their own context. They might be using tools their own way. They all are going to have their own backlog. And you start to get these conflicts, right? Where the context doesn't match up. The processes might not match up. The tooling might not match up. And they also often have this capacity mismatch, right? Where there's a lot of one and a few of the other. And so what this leads to is this kind of fourth force, which is something that we do in response to those silos, is queues, right? How do we cover for our disconnects and mismatches between these various teams? Well, this is where we overuse this thing called the ticket system, right? We put these queues everywhere, and we all know how well that works, right? We've seen this time and time again. It's the delays. It's the, things come back to you. It's not quite right. You got to go get you got to go ping somebody else to go look in their queue to do something for you. We start to feel all this friction across these queues. And it's really not surprising that, ticket queues are an expensive way to manage work. In fact, if you look outside of dev and ops work and all these other fields, other industries, this is a well-known thing that working in queues has these costs to it, right? Cost of longer cycle time, right? Obviously, things are going into the queue. Increased risks, right? Which come from the disconnects that we talked about, right? More variability, right? You get a lot of one-offs in these in these queues. More overhead. We got to manage the queues itself. All those things add up to lower quality. And very interesting, less motivation, right? They find that when people's work goes into a queue, they don't see it come out the other side, or they have to wait for it to come out the other side. It lowers your motivation versus that instant feedback of seeing things, come to fruition from your work. And we spent all this time talking about value streams, right? We want to look at a value stream and understand value stream engineering and understand how we're going to improve the value stream. But working in queues, we end up doing is taking that end system and kind of blowing it up into different queues, right? So we're disintegrating and obfuscating all this work that we've done to get people to see things as end-to-end value streams. They're just seeing bits and pieces being shoved into their queues. And, these queues encourage a lot of manual work, right? I'm going to act like kind of a siloed labor pool. I'm going to parachute in. I'm going to take this ticket. I'm going to do something, then on to the next one, then on to the next one. And that manual work also tends to lead to a lot of snowflakes, right? Which I think is a great term. It means, hey, this thing might be technically acceptable, but it's brittle, it's unreproducible. It's a unique thing onto itself. And that often happens with this manual labor. So it becomes difficult to automate, difficult to standardize. The more we have, teams working in these siloed ways. And to mix metaphor here, these snowflakes become like time bombs, right? That the only thing worse, for automation than not working is automation is a little bit off, right? Or something that's a little bit of variation, a little bit of difference. And then we see folks retreating from these automation efforts because of all of these problems. And then the siloed way of working reinforces itself. And this is a quick note, are all ticket queues bad, right? I want to say no, right? Just use ticket queues, we're talking ticket queues, what they're good for, right? They're good for documenting true problems, issues, exceptions. Maybe when we have to do for, compliance reasons or whatever, we have to need to route for necessary approvals. Ticket systems are great for that. What the problems we're talking about in those previous slides is that tickets queues are bad as general purpose work management systems, right? That's where it introduces all that cost that in a lot of ways, we're kind of like these boiling frogs. We just sort of become immune to those costs, but reality is they're, quite expensive. You really can get down and analyze it. So those are the four kind of forces that have always undermined operations. Now I'd like to kind of talk about, well, how has the DevOps and SRE movements helped to counteract these forces? And by counteracting these forces, we're able to make this you build it, you run it, more of a reality. So kind of going around the horn again, this idea of shift left, right? We've heard this over and over again in DevOps and SRE, that how do you push the ability to take action closest to the problem, right? And that's done through enablement, right? That includes psychological safety and the tooling, right? Excessive toil, right? I think it's one of the things we've seen coming out of the SRE movement, the ability to say, hey, number one, toil is something we have to track for each team, right? Seems simple, but very few folks do it. Setting these toil limits for each team, right? And then knowing that as an organization, we're going to fund, whether it be through swarming or through direct investment, we're going to fund the efforts to reduce that toil with the emphasis on the teams that are over their toil limits, right? And then, bonus, right? All the other things that came out of the SRE movement, service level objectives, air budgets, you name it. And then silos, right? This is where it gets interesting is, the obvious one is, hey, get rid of as many silos as possible, right? We've seen the rise of this notion of cross-functional teams, right? Again, we start out on these, DevOps, which led into the SRE journey. The idea of Dev and Ops working together was just anathema, right? It didn't happen. Now we're talking about cross-functional teams. I think as part of almost everyone's conversation to some degree. See very few organizations where it's still Dev and Ops, full stop, right? Toss it over the wall. So, and I think key learning that we've found is it's not everyone do everything, right? That it's really a horizontal shared responsibility. You still have specializations, you still have teams or groupings, but it's really about a horizontal shared responsibility across dev and ops. For dev, it's understanding operations and what goes on there. For operations, it's that fast feedback to development and really acting as one sort of integrated unit, whether or not it's the same people doing the work over and over again. I've also learned that shared and dedicated responsibility is not really org model dependent, right? You look at there's called the Netflix model, right? Just as a kind of high cartoon example, right? That it's all about cross-functional teams. There is no other, right? That's going to help you. It's all cross-functional teams, and they're shared tooling teams. Those are their own cross-functional teams, and sort of that's how it works. You look at the Google model, especially how defined in SRE, they are separate teams. There's development teams, there's SRE teams. But if you really see how the model works, there's these clear handoff requirements and air budgets with consequences, which basically means that they can hand things back to development teams if there's problems. There's models for embedding and cross-pollination. So, the org model is not nearly as important as the shared and dedicated responsibility. And so, but what about those cross-cutting concerns, right? What about these situations where, we just can't put everybody on these same teams, right? We still have to have these specialist concerns. Now, aren't we right just back to where we started, right? Which is ticket queues between all these various folks. And that's where we get to sort of what's gone on around that, right? And I think that's really the rise of platforms, right? Platform teams, platform engineering, really self-service operations, right? To say that there are these cross-cutting concerns, right? And we're going to build these as a platform, as a self-service platform that allow other teams to consume them as needed, and so they can work in their own build and run cycles. And really, this works with any organizational model, right? It's not just with the sort of pure cross-functional teams. It can work with the sort of the hybrid models. I think what's fascinating thing here is, which is really, I think, where this is all culminating to. Thank you for going with me on this journey. Is we've seen these forces come together to really transform how operations organizations are really structured, right? That the old model, so we have, right, dev, we had ops, right? Dev would throw things over the wall to ops. Some of the DevOps, movement and SRE movement was breaking down that wall, right? But you still saw dev and ops as kind of separate things. And, to be fair, a lot of it was, I think dev has gone on this lean or agile journey for, 20 plus years, right? It's been in the textbooks, it's been in the blogs, it's been in sort of in the tools in some way, even if people weren't doing agile for that long. I'm putting doing agile in air quotes. The concepts are still there. The idea of flow, right? The idea of fast feedback, the idea of working in small teams and small batches, right? That was all kind of in the ether, right? It was in sort of, or the milieu of development, right? Whereas operations, it's like, that didn't really come on until late, really the last maybe 5 years to be generous. So a different way of organizing, a different way of thinking about it. But now that we've seen that this idea of DevOps and of SRE is really kind of permeated into the high performing operations organization, we're seeing they're starting to rethink, well, how do we even structure ourselves? How does this even work, right? And we're seeing that, there's sort of this new thing that's going on where what used to be the domain of operations, right, is kind of being split into two, right? There's the SRE teams that want to trend towards being distributed into the different application teams, right? To build those you build it, you run it teams. And then the other part of operations is really gravitating towards platform engineering, creating platform teams that build platforms that have strong, development and engineering components to them, also having the operators to operate those platforms, right? And then strong self-service and fast feedback cycles between those teams. So, I think this is going to have there's political and career ramifications to this type of change, but really it's something we've just seen that I think is inevitable. As you start to see those lines blur and you start to see the concerns where it's either, hey, are we having app teams closer to the business or assigned to business units that have build and run, they have the dev and the SRE folks in them, consuming centralized platforms that have the dev and ops in that as well. So it's essentially a whole set of product teams working like product teams, integrating together through self-service. And we've seen with the rise of platform engineering, SRE, it's kind of the new division of how operations is working. So recap, right? As our friend Werner Vogel says, you build it, you run it. I think it's starting to happen now. And why, right? The maturing cloud native platforms and tools, that's just becoming a reality. I think in the last really 2 years, you've seen the, kind of whole jump into the public cloud by, folks who people thought were 5+ years away from doing so. With that jump, looking at, a lot of these new cloud native platforms, the tooling that came out of those new cloud native platforms is informing even how they manage their legacy systems. So I think we're just seeing a maturity that's come to the forefront. Observability is coming into focus, full pun intended there. And then these DevOps and SRE transformations have sunk in, right? And I think operations is transforming itself from the inside out to be much more high performing and much more in line with how these lean and agile and DevOps and SRE principles have evolved. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed my talk. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can always do that. My DMs are open at Damon Edwards, or if that's not your thing, you can just email me at damon@pagerduty.com. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the whole Techstrong team.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at the top 9 skills for SREs to master. It's easy to talk at a high level about what site reliability engineers do. Basically, they ensure that IT systems achieve availability and performance requirements. But which skills exactly do SREs need to perform their jobs? That's a more complicated question. Although SRE skills may vary from one team to the next, depending on the types of systems managed and the main types of reliability challenges faced, virtually all SREs need a core set of standard skills that allow them to understand and manage the type of complex, distributed systems they will have to support at the typical organization today. This article looks at 9 of those skills that comprise the core set and breaks down why SREs need to know them. And we look at what organizations can expect when they transition to DevSecOps. While DevOps delivers on the promise to increase the rate of delivery, the traditional CI/CD framework does not emphasize security. There are many benefits to upgrading from DevOps to a dedicated DevSecOps practice, and they are important to understand before diving in. This article details the advantages of shifting to DevSecOps and why it's so important for organizations to embrace shifting security and compliance testing further left to remove bottlenecks and enable the delivery of more secure code faster. Also on DevOps is an article about feature flags and how they can benefit SREs. In general, feature flags are closely associated with software engineering, but site reliability engineers also can benefit. SREs may not be the ones to create feature flags, but they should work closely with developers to ensure that the applications their teams support include feature flags. This article looks at why feature flags benefit SREs and what SREs can do to make sure their organizations take full advantage of them. The upshot: SREs can leverage feature flags as a way of supporting the core SRE goal, which is maximizing reliability. All right, over on Container Journal, we have the latest from Platform 9, which released the results of a survey that showed concerns over security, management, high availability, and observability are all simultaneously rising in near equal measures as organizations embrace cloud-native technologies. At the same time, cloud-native hiring continues to be a priority, with DevOps, cloud platform engineering, cloud-native developers, and security the top hiring investments for 2022. According to the survey results, more than 2/3 of respondents are deploying cloud-native technologies everywhere, from the edge to the cloud. App containerization is accelerating, with 53% of respondents planning to containerize their current applications. Nearly 85% of respondents are using Kubernetes or have plans to deploy it in the next 6 months. This article delves into these and more survey findings, which show that as more and more enterprises adopt cloud-native technologies, there is a corresponding growth of the deployment of distributed infrastructure across public, hybrid, and edge clouds. But many organizations just aren't prepared for the challenges that come with managing distributed infrastructure efficiently and don't have the high skills level needed to do so. And on Security Boulevard, we are keeping up with the latest on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the cybersecurity implications. As part of that, we look at what organizations can do to protect themselves as the situation escalates. In advance of the expected attack, last week the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency issued a Shields Up risk declaration alert, which highlighted several cybersecurity vulnerabilities that nation-state and cybercriminal actors may attempt to take advantage of. Now, as things have gotten worse, organizations would do well to ensure their data and networks are as secure as possible. In addition to increased monitoring and standing up incident response teams, organizations can apply two-factor authentication to everything, forcing administrator password changes for non-two-factor authentication systems and turning off everything else. The basics matter also. Companies should dust off their disaster recovery and business continuity plans and familiarize themselves with relevant plan components and brainstorm potential disruption scenarios they may find themselves in. Smaller organizations should be doing the same things that they should be doing in other circumstances, which is making sure they are up to date on their patches, deploying multi-factor authentication everywhere they can, and outsourcing the security issues they can't handle to managed security services providers. And finally, we have the news from Darktrace, which announced it is acquiring Cybersprint BV, which makes a tool that employs machine learning algorithms to surface vulnerabilities that cybercriminals might exploit. The attack surface data gathered via the Cybersprint AI technology will enrich Darktrace's detect and respond solution, which uses machine learning technologies to discover anomalies indicative of cyber threats and then quarantine those threats in real time. The Darktrace platform is based on attack path modeling and graph theory that represents organizational networks as directional, weighted graphs with nodes where multiple lines meet and edges where they connect. A weighted graph can be used to identify the path of least resistance to key assets to estimate the probability that an adversary will be able to conduct successful lateral movement from node A to node B. That capability provides a realistic assessment in real time of the attack patterns that will be employed against an organization's most critical assets. The acquisition extends Darktrace's goal to provide a continuous cybersecurity AI loop based on machine learning algorithms that learn the IT environment they protect. All right, that is it for the headlines. I'll be back tomorrow with a fresh new batch. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, I have a conversation with Mike Jones, aka the Haunted Hacker, about the cybersecurity implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and really what organizations worldwide need to be thinking about how they could be impacted. And we also kind of go off the grid a little bit, talk about some of the things that people aren't thinking about when it comes to this escalating war that's happening now. Lots of takeaways in this conversation. I highly encourage you to check it out. There are things that I think organizations of every size in every industry should be thinking about. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with Mike Jones, the Haunted Hacker. Mike, thanks so much for being here. I want to talk to you about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And I know you are in high demand these days, especially with respect to this particular situation that's going on. But I feel like a lot of the conversations around what has been happening, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, they're all kind of linear conversations. And I don't know if you understand what I mean by that, but I feel like we're all having the same conversations. But I think there's a lot more to unpack about this. So I kind of want to open it up to you by asking you the question: what is not being talked about when we are discussing Russia, Ukraine, and cybersecurity?
Absolutely. And it's a pleasure being here. It's always a pleasure. So just a couple things to start out with. They started this campaign against Ukraine by launching ballistic missiles into the Ukraine. Significance of that is they weren't equipped with nuclear warheads, but that's one of the type of missiles that nuclear warheads are pretty predominantly carried on. And it was a message to the West of, hey, this is for real. This is serious stuff. But from a cyber standpoint, so there's so much going on. We've seen Wiper being released in Western Europe, and it's starting to move very quickly. And that started during this campaign. They've already hit all of the banking structure in Ukraine. They've hit parts of the grid there. And this is not only to enable them to walk into the Ukraine, but also send a message. We all know that they've already threatened the U.S. with cyber attacks. And, one of my predictions last year was geopolitical tensions will motivate attacks. And that's what we're seeing. And the cyber portion of it is being used as a weapon, just like we saw with the ransomware against Ukraine. And it's spreading. It's really fast how this is moving. But it's a perfect storm. And Putin took advantage of the circumstances with the U.S. and looked at us as being weak because we were having political tensions internally, the pandemic, of course, the economy's bad. And then you take all of that and look at the response that Biden had in Afghanistan and that whole operation. And this was a perfect window for Putin. What a lot of people don't understand is that China is watching this whole situation play out. And if we don't do something offensive, then China is going to jump on Taiwan. And all this is going to be preceded by cyber attacks, RF weapons. We've already seen them use RF weapons against Ukraine. And all of this is just a playbook for what's going to happen to the U.S. I think the FBI just released a statement today warning Americans that the critical infrastructure for banking is probably going to be targeted, as well as the multiple grids in the U.S., power grids. And that's another thing I said last year was that we're going to start seeing a lot of these infrastructure attacks. And it's just because of this geopolitical situation. This geopolitical situation has actually been going on for quite a while. You look at China with the threats against Taiwan and not acknowledging Taiwan. And then you look at Russia and, wanting to get back. And here's where I'm kind of split, right? So media depicts Putin as this dictator, as this horrible person, this monster. But we fail to realize that this has been going on for 14 years. And at one point, the Ukraine was part of Russia. Mm-hmm. And there's parts of the Ukraine who don't even acknowledge the Ukrainian government. They still say that they're part of Russia, the separatist states. So politically, there's a lot of moving parts. And I don't think people take that into effect. But the biggest thing is how swiftly they hit the Ukraine banking system mm-hmm. and completely disconnected people from their money. And the U.S. is not, I guess, immune to that type of attack at all. And our power grid is not in any situation or any condition to handle an attack like that on a power grid.
Yeah. It's kind of frightening when you think about the fact that so many things were hit so quickly at the onset of this, and just thinking about the way things are set up, and we've got the banking systems that connect to other banking systems internationally. It's not just an isolated problem or issue in the Ukraine. This is going to have ripple effects worldwide. From not only from an economic standpoint, but also probably from a socioeconomic impact as well. So, it's not enough for us to say, well, this is happening over there. We don't really need to worry about it. It's not us. I think everybody is really recognizing and preparing themselves, maybe mentally or even infrastructurally, if that's a word, for the inevitable cyber attack. And so, and then you kind of throw China in on top of it. There's a lot of things that that we as a country, and also from an organizational perspective, we all need to really take into consideration. Do you think that we're going to see kind of a rapid increase in cyber threats and cyber attacks, or do you think that this is going to be kind of a slow burn, if you will?
I think it'll get to a point where if the U.S. Makes an offensive move against Russia, it'll be pretty swift. Now, if Biden sticks to his guns and says that he's not sending troops, that he's not really truly going to get involved, it may be a slow burn. But I don't see that happening. I see Russia finding a reason to blame something on the U.S. or implicate them in some sort of attack. And at that point, it's going to be all out. And the sad thing is that we already have people that are in the critical infrastructure. Like they've been there for years. We know they're there.
Yeah.
And it's just that one kill switch, and it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I'm not sure a lot of people really understand, just the magnitude of something like that happening. We're talking about critical infrastructure. We're not just talking about power, light. We're talking about the internet, and so many organizations, if they don't have the internet, they don't have a business, basically. So it's really hard for me to kind of reconcile in my head how we as a country will be able to kind of move forward and run a business and just do what we do in our daily lives without having the internet and having other parts of the critical infrastructure. I mean, because we are going to be so hamstrung think about when there was an AWS outage and everybody freaked out about Slack, not working correctly, or they couldn't get their Netflix or whatever. Imagine if, you and I couldn't be talking right now, and just so many things are reliant on the internet, and it's kind of like I can't even really. I just can't even. Let me just put it that way. So
the banking system is really interesting. I had heard from somebody today that Biden was actually considering cutting off Russia from the SWIFT system, which allows them to do transactions with other countries with the world economy. Yeah. And if that happens, you can guarantee there will be an onslaught of cyber attacks against the U.S. for sure, and it'll be SWIFT.
So, what steps are being taken now ahead of time with the recognition that, there's the probability that we are going to be attacked by Russia, at least from a cyber perspective?
There's people talking about it. The FBI is making statements, trying to make people aware. But here's the problem is that, a lot of people didn't expect Russia to be that bold, to be that aggressive, and walk into the Ukraine. There was even word that they were turning around and going back to Russia, which I knew that's not his MO. Like if he amasses troops, something's going to happen. Right. So I don't know if anything's being done, to be honest with you. And a lot of people that I've talked to, like the conversation never even comes up as to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, because it's so far away that they don't think it's going to have a direct impact on them as a citizen of the U.S.
Right.
And it's sad, but our government, we don't have the best leaders right now. A lot of people don't have faith in Biden. And when you look at the world's opinion of the U.S. and Biden as a leader, there's a reason why this is happening. They see him as being weak, and they see our political structure as failing.
Well, I would hope that there would be some sort of controls in place that if we were ever under a cyber attack, that we'd be able to somehow cut it off, or at least stem the damage. Can we do that? I mean, is that something that the FBI or the whatever governmental organization, is that something that they could do?
See, I think they could, given enough time. But this is like the very first time that we've been under a threat of a cyber attack of that magnitude. I mean, when you look at what happened in Ukraine, the whole entire banking system, like, we're not used to that type of threat or that type of action against us. So, I question that. Are we ready? Have we done those tabletops of China and Russia hitting us all at once? I don't know. I would like to think that the NSA and government operations have focused really heavily on that over the past couple of years, as we saw the issues with China and Russia mounting. But again, that's probably something we'll never find out about. And the only other way really is to go the route of China and have our own, block off the internet and just have our own American firewall. But we're in no place to do that. And the whole purpose of the internet is so that we can do business with people across the world. If we did do something like that, it would disable us quite a bit.
Yeah, it would really astound me if we, as a country, the governmental agencies, if they haven't been preparing for something like this, because I can't believe that we didn't all think that this was going to be inevitable at some point. There have been enough indications over the years that that different countries, including North Korea, I mean, they've done their share of damage in the past. So it would really, really surprise me if there was not some sort of capability that they're just not talking about because they don't want the rest of the world to know about it. But some way of protecting our infrastructure in case of a full-scale attack. And, I guess there's a difference between, attacks on critical infrastructure, kind of one-off organizations. It's quite something different when it's an entire country that's coming after you. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. And I really think that is, that may actually be the worst part of this situation, is the fact that we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. So I think we're going to see a lot of things unfolding over the next couple of weeks as tensions continue to mount and actions are being played out in other countries. And it's just a matter of time, I guess, before it reaches us.
And the sad thing is that Russia, their APT groups and their military units that do cyber attacks are very highly skilled. And I don't know if we have the fortitude to stand up against that.
Well, always a ray of sunshine you are, Mike.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. So what can we do then? I mean, as citizens, as global citizens, as companies, we've got to be able to do something to protect ourselves and protect our infrastructure and our assets. And so what steps can we take as those people and as those organizations to at least minimize the damage when something should happen?
So, you talk about preparing, right? And what can we do as a country? I think we need to reduce that to what can we do as individuals, right? When you see the attack on the banking infrastructure in Ukraine, how many of us have some way to get cash or have a stash of cash somewhere? When you talk about preparing for something like that, it brings a thought, the whole idea of the preppers, right? And how crazy we thought the preppers were, that there would never be a reason to do what they're doing. Well, this is a prime example of, they're probably the smart ones because they do have that backload of cash. They do have access to assets if something happens. Same thing with the power grid. Do you have the proper things to keep your household going? Do you have enough food to where you could, maybe last a couple of days? I think those are the things that people need to think about, and I am doom and gloom, but the thing is I look at things that could potentially affect us as a country, and I try to warn people ahead of time that, from what I'm seeing, this is probably a good possibility. And I haven't been too far off. And I do it to help people to prepare for something that could have a negative impact. And this is a prime example. Make sure you have access to assets. Make sure you have some form of communication that doesn't require a landline or a conference bridge. All of those things. Because if we get hit with a cyber attack, it more than likely will hit the grid, it will hit banking, and possibly food supply. So do what you can do to prepare your family. You have to be independent because the government has other bigger things to worry about than each individual citizen. They're trying to defend an entire country and keep our borders solid. But you have to think for yourself because the government's not going to do it for you.
Yeah, well, the thing that concerns me about all of that now is I just hope folks don't make a run on the banks and completely, collapse our financial system, which could happen. I mean, if there is enough of a panic about making sure that folks had money and a way to pay for things, should the infrastructure go down. And same thing with the grocery stores. We're already having supply chain issues. I mean,
right.
Let's compound it with a war and see what happens.
It's a perfect storm.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So any parting thoughts? Anything else we need to consider about this situation in general and what we can do to kind of, make our little corner of the world a little bit safer and better?
Sure. As a corporation, I would start looking and building, ACLs and alerting mechanisms to look for specific IPs in Russia. If you have a chance and you don't have a direct line of business to a Russian province, block the entire country because it's going to come eventually. And as individuals, stay aware of the news. Don't be one of those ones who only cares about Starbucks and Target. For once, maybe look at the geopolitical situation and think about what you would do as an individual to protect your family and to make sure that you can function on a day-to-day basis if something happens. And it may not, but the way I'm looking at it, I think it's inevitable.
Well, let's hope you're wrong. But I will say, based on your track record, at least with me, you are scarily accurate, Mike. And so I do appreciate your insight, as always, and your expertise. And you've certainly got us all thinking a lot more about these things. So thank you very much. And thanks for making the time for me today. I do appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right, great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with a webinars preview. I got a lot of great webinars for you on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. And here are 3 happening this week so that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called Why Zero Trust Segmentation Beats CVE Chasing All Day, Every Day. This one is happening Tuesday, that's tomorrow, March 1st at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by New Vector. Scanning for and remediating vulnerabilities has become a very common and very necessary security practice in software development environments. Unfortunately, CVE chasing has also become the primary security activity performed early in the software development lifecycle, sometimes even prioritized over other security layers that are overly complex or negatively impact development velocity. This webinar will compare CVE scanning with zero trust segmentation and offer real examples of organizations automating zero trust early in their software development lifecycle to block zero-day vulnerabilities of their existing CVE scanning couldn't prevent. Good stuff. All right, the second one is the 2022 API Security Checklist. This one is happening Wednesday, March 2nd at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by WallArm. Guarding against common API security issues is only the beginning of your organization's security responsibilities. Your product security and DevSecOps teams, not to mention your engineering organization, must be able to quickly detect and respond to security incidents that will affect your business and your customers. So this webinar will walk through the 2022 API Security Checklist, which outlines the most common API security issues, their implications, and mitigation strategies. Attendees will learn how to address the most common API security issues, the key components of building their API security strategy, and the tools that help product security teams keep up with the rapid pace of engineering and application deployments. The third and final webinar I want to let you know about today is called The Secret to Effective Secrets Management. This one is happening Thursday, March 3rd at 3 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by Keeper Security. Since IT network secrets unlock access to highly privileged systems and data, securing secrets is just as critical to preventing cyber attacks as securing end user passwords. This webinar is an introduction to Keeper Secrets Management, and during which attendees will learn the security dangers of secret sprawl and hard-coded or embedded credentials, why ad hoc approaches to secrets management don't work, and how KSM, Keeper Secrets Management, can help organizations implement and maintain secrets management best practices. Good stuff there as well. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me on tomorrow when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
With the pleasure of being joined by Andreas Prinz, who is VP of Product Management with StackState. Andreas, welcome.
Thank you, Mitch, and thanks for having me.
Well, we've got a great topic. Thank you for being here. And first, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about StackState.
Yeah, thanks. That will be great to do. So I joined StackState a little while ago, but I've been in the DevOps space as a whole a bit longer, both leading engineering teams and leading the product management team from a company called ZBL Labs, where we're hyper-focused on release automation and deployment automation. But then, fun fact, right? Everything is moving towards developers, so also observability. And that's the reason why I actually joined StackState, because I do believe that the observability space is growing and becoming more and more important, and the market starts to understand. So that's one of the reasons why I joined. But what I really like is a kind of the triangle between engineering, product, and the customer, right? And then it doesn't matter much which role you take. But here at StackState, I'm leading the product function, so really focused on product strategy, product direction, and helping out product management to deliver the product. So I've been in these roles for a couple of years right now, and so far so good. Based out of the Netherlands, if that matters, but I'm enjoying it.
I didn't think that was a Texas accent. So yes, very good. Welcome from the Netherlands. And I'm here in Colorado, as you can tell from my background, which is Florida, whole different issue. But anyway, so let's talk about observability. Obviously, it's what your company does, what StackState is about. It's kind of exploded. It is top of the funnel of conversations, maybe that and, a few other things, but it's certainly right there in the mix. I like to say observability has made operations cool again. It has really elevated the role of operations and SRE and things like that. Why is that happening? What's your experiences, both as you think about the product, the market, but also as you talk about customers?
Yeah, I do think there are a couple reasons, right, why this field is evolving so quickly. So what we've seen, obviously, right, is the big boost on release and deployment automation, starting off from CI. We've had a tremendous transformation from a cloud perspective, right, where new technology was brought in, and then we have a transformation on practice and process, right, with the entire Scrum movement. And then actually, I do believe we realized we've accelerated the first part, right, the front part of the entire development process, and all of a sudden discovered that there's, the second half, right, which is your application and your machine in production. And the fact that the technology, right, as well as from a platform, as well as the automation perspective, are raised towards a particular level, we also all of a sudden can extend how we observe our application, right? And seeing a big evolution from monitoring into observability, much deeper understanding the application behavior and the need to do so. That's one. But more important, why is it happening? Not only from a technology perspective, it's also the business who starts to understand, I need to know what's actually going on under the hood, right? So the fact we can now start augmenting our applications with observability data, if you like, that is also from a business perspective really, really valuable. And also at the same time, a kind of the challenge, right? That's around the corner.
Yeah, that acceleration is really, it's also shortened the cycle of things, and we're pushing out things much more quickly, smaller increments, but it's all changing all the time. So operations doesn't get to live with a release for 3, 4, 6 months. It's every day it might be different, or every week it might be different. And it's a very different kind of architecture too, cloud native and things like that.
Yeah. And in the beginning, right, we've just had a transformation from a speed perspective. So we were releasing more often, but what we were releasing was still a kind of the application, right, as a monolith, or at least, right, as a kind of a big unit. So the app was changing, but not necessarily big time, a kind of the entire construction of components, right? But with the move to cloud and now even further to serverless, it just exists instantly, right? And then it disappears. And if you think about that from how do you want to observe that? How do you want to understand how it behaves under the hood? I believe that's an entire different ballgame that we should realize, and then ask ourselves the question, what to do about it, and what is important to do there.
Almost like your observability can be your time machine to look back and see what was happening, because that thing is gone, right? If it's serverless. And
exactly. Yeah.
Which, StackState, interesting that your name. So we always talk about people, process, and tools, and as a way of kind of framing things. It's still at the heart. We can talk about telemetry data and tracing and logs and all kinds of interesting things, but it still comes back to people and teams of people that are kind of making this happen, right?
Yeah, definitely, right. So, and then if you take a look at the lens of a team, I sometimes call that the triple layered development challenge, right? In these days, I do think for many development teams that were just in an average larger enterprise, right, just doing their day-to-day job, all of a sudden the technology is bringing such a big push. And as said, right, it's the development practice that is changing, how you release software, it's the technology, the stack. And that's the beauty, it's ops, right, operations being pushed left, another discipline, right, moving shift left after testing and build and deployment into the hands of the developer, right? And that's really what I see from a process perspective, that is, at least at our customers, right, or the industry we talk to, that can be challenging. At the super modern companies, right, they're fine. But if you want to apply this at scale, just in, let's say, a regular larger bank or an insurance company, it's a bit of a challenge on how to deal. And then the role of an SRE is not right. It's not necessarily to be in every team, but really to understand the challenge these regular DevOps teams would face, and how do you coach them in this triple layered challenge that they face and that they have. There's the role of the SRE critical to just bring the practice in the company and in the process.
Yeah, it's got to be an interesting challenge creating technology, creating products in a market where the jobs are changing, right? SRE isn't like born yesterday, but it wasn't something that many companies were doing, 2 or 3 years ago. And now it's really elevated as well, right along with observability. Usually those things are well connected.
Yeah.
How does this got to present some interesting challenges or opportunities for you for how you help not only meet the current roles, but also help evolve with them?
Yeah. That's definitely true, right? And it's probably extremely black and white, but what I see happening with a lot of the SREs roles, or how they implement it, is how it originates. An SRE was really focused on the technology in relation to the service or the business or the customer, right? That's how at Google and the more modern companies, how it was applied. What I see sometimes is that only kind of the technical part of the SRE practice is taken, and a lot of teams lost sight on why they are doing it. Why are they focusing on observability? And that's for the end customer experience. So what we try to do with our solution is really understand is, hey, how can we enable the SRE not only to deliver reliable solutions, but how can we help him to understand or her the impact from a customer perspective, from a business service perspective. And that's an entire game, right? Not necessarily focusing on a component, but really, why are we doing this, and what is the customer waiting for? And that's the challenge an SRE will have and needs to understand.
That's interesting. That's roles, teams, tools, and how we're delivering digital experiences now. We don't just think about delivering software, right?
Yeah.
And that's got to be an interesting challenge also from a company perspective, because I don't want to say it's a culture shift or paradigm shift, or maybe it is. But when you're thinking about delivering digital experiences, you have to have the whole spectrum of from the time they may have connected with you some time ago to what just happened and what's happening within, our software, anywhere in up and down or breadth-wise of the stack, right?
Yeah. And then if you think about that for a minute, right? What I see, right, is that the good part of the DevOps movement is teams have gained tremendous autonomy, right? And I'm a firm believer that is a good thing. But with that autonomy, they all got the right to pick and choose their own development, observability, monitoring tools. So what we sometimes say is that DevOps teams are the new silos, right? If you take a team, they operate pretty well. They have their components in control. But if you think about stitching an entire customer experience that potentially crosses 10 applications or hundreds of components over 5 or 6 or probably even 10 DevOps teams, then all of a sudden that autonomy, right, and the tool sprawl is all of a sudden a potential bottleneck. And then the question is, how do you bring this together into a uniform topology? So as soon as the customer, is facing an outage or whatsoever, how do you then trace over all these small silos? How do you then trace the entire experience of a customer, and how do you act upon that? And that's where we try to bring the different tools together and stitch that in a topology so people can see the end-to-end chain rather than an optimized component from each and every team.
Those interdependent workflows across multiple application teams, et cetera, is not something we talk as much about as I think we should. Because you can operate as a standalone team, sometimes inside the organization, that usually evolves, or as a startup or whatever. But ultimately, you're going to be talking to other apps and other systems. It's interesting you bring up the tools and multiple tools across teams as well as inside a team. With the cloud, we can keep massive amounts of data, I guess, to the good and to the bad, right? And sources of that data. And that presents a lot of complexity, I think, to putting that, constructing what's happening either inside the app or the experience for the customer.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree, right? And then we've seen all these data lakes, right, that serve a particular purpose. But I sometimes think, right, with development teams, if there's data, right, we use it, right? It's not necessarily that we truly understand what is it that I want to achieve, but there's data, so let's use it. Let's monitor, let's alert on it, let's do something with it. And the good part with that entire SRE thinking, right? If you think about SLOs and SLIs, you all of a sudden start thinking about, but what is it that I want to achieve, right? And that's a small change happening at the team scale. But if, again, you will put it to a customer perspective, often a customer SLO, right? The entire objective you want to achieve from a customer experience perspective doesn't reside in a single team, right? So then again, the question is, how do you bring the data together and actually put an SLO on an entire trace, or how do you define SLIs that do contribute to that bigger customer experience? And I really see that as a struggle. I think open telemetry as a movement, as a practice, is helpful because all of a sudden, right, it's kind of tool independent. But then still, you need to articulate what you want to achieve. And what we see happening in many of our customers is there are these SRE coaches that do need to use a kind of a holistic tool to bring it together and then articulate at a holistic scale, kind of, right, end to end, the SLOs and the SLIs. And then the teams are just a portion of the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, open telemetry, I think, has really kind of changed the game for our industry, particularly around observability. Yeah. Instead of one-to-many, integrations you're trying to build, you really can focus on, at least partially, with open telemetry. I'm curious. So, tell me a little bit about what is the kind of unique thinking or approach about that StackState takes to this, because you're obviously not the only player in the observability space. There are a number of them. So how do you differentiate? What's sort of your uniqueness?
Yeah. Glad you're asking. So there are two unique capabilities to StackState, and the first one is what we call topology-powered observability. So what we believe is that on every data that you harvest from silos or from whatever streams the data is coming in, the topology need to be at the heart. That's where we correlate the data, where we articulate the dependencies between components, independent if it's an infrastructure component, if it's an application, or even a serverless function that is somewhere in your landscape. And by doing that, right, out of the box, we provide you that context that is important to understand the bigger picture. Imagine you have an outage somewhere in a deep down component. You can just travel the tree to the top, right, and see, hey, what is my business application or my business function that is impacted? And we call that holistic observability or topology-powered observability. You are really the topology at the heart to position the data out of the box from a business perspective and correlate it to each other. That's one. And that is helpful because then you can quickly judge what is the impact. The second thing, which is really a kind of a unique there, is our time series approach to topology or to observability. And why is that important in the modern era is when components come and go, at the moment you watch your environment, the component might no longer exist, right? But might be a component that is gone, might be the cause of the problem. So by the ability to travel back in time, see all the events and the components that exist or didn't exist, we can much easier help you to understand, hey, what caused the problem, or where do I need to optimize, or how can an SRE coach a DevOps team? And these two, right, the topology and the time traveling helps you to more holistically understand, if that's the correct word, the landscape and what you want to do there.
It makes a lot of sense because as you were describing it, and then you said the word, but the word that came to my mind was context. Right?
Context.
I kind of know what's the landscape of what I'm dealing with, because it's not what it is right now. It's something else, something different. And it may have actually changed during that experience that thing I'm trying to diagnose or track down or triage, whatever it might be. Well, so we have some good things going on. I know you, StackState has a webinar coming up on March 3rd. I believe it's at 11 o'clock Eastern time in the US. Let's talk about what some of the things we think might be talked about at that, because I want to make sure people have an opportunity to go check us out there.
Yeah, I briefly touched upon it. This is we'll do that together with one of our customers. It's NN. It's a large insurance banking company, and what they have is they have this data lake oriented approach, and they realized if we want to benefit more from the data that we have in Splunk, we need something that correlates and brings the context into that data. And that's exactly where they use StackState for. And the beauty of that is the teams that are in that company, they can continue working how they worked. They bring the data into a central data lake, data collection, whatever we want to call it, and that's Splunk. And then StackState lives on top of that and brings and stitches all that data into that topology perspective. And why is that important, right? Why should you join? Well, because that helps you, right, to reduce MTTR, or in this case, that was their main focus, to reduce MTTR and really quickly understand if an outage occurs, where does it happen, and who need to be involved. And that will be the major topic of the webinar.
Great. A lot of connection points there. Finance. I started my career in finance and banking. And challenges around meeting some SLO goals and MTTR, and dealing with all of that data, adding sort of the topology approach to it. Should be a really great conversation. I know we'll be looking forward to it. So I hope folks will join us there. Well, tell us, is there what kind of information do folks have access to with StackState? Visiting your site, or access to some of the software that you provide? How can they best get a hold of that?
Well, there are obviously, right, a couple good videos and this type of materials, but really one that stands out, in my opinion, is the white paper on the maturity model of observability, because this really nicely describes, right, how you can grow as a company from initial monitoring all the way through observability and even AI ops, right? So if you've built data collection, your data structure, how then to use AI ops to automate even more and bother less about what's happening. So that's a really great piece of material I can definitely recommend. If people want to play with the tool, there's a playground, so that's also possible. But in particular, the white paper is useful for everyone to understand what all the different areas or sites are from that observability space.
Sounds like that'd be really helpful. It's always nice to have some idea of what the path might look like and where you are on it, and exactly. Avenues you might take. Everybody doesn't take the same journey, but at least you can look ahead and see, okay, we're about here. Oh, that's maybe the next destination we want to go to. Let's not do AI ops yet. Let's do this, or vice versa.
Yeah. Exactly.
Great. Is StackState, is it a SaaS based? Is it on-prem? Is it both? Tell us
it's
about
both.
that.
Yeah. So it's originated, right, like many companies, as a self-hosted version. That's still there, but it's also SaaS. So if you're having your cloud environment, AWS, Kubernetes, these type of technologies, definitely go to the SaaS version of the product. But many customers don't only focus with observability on the modern technology, they also do the hybrid space, right? Because often, if you think about an internet banking or a mobile, whatever, right, it consists of multiple layers. And then the hybrid offering is super useful to observe the entire end-to-end stack. So really, depending on the use case, we would recommend one over the other.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you, Andreas Prinz, who's VP of Product Management with StackState. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, we are back. Closing things out today, we've got the View with Vizard. In this conversation, Mike Vizard speaks with Cloudian CTO Gary Ogasawara, and they talk about how organizations can thwart ransomware attacks in Kubernetes environments. Certainly a very relevant topic these days, and it's a great conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Gary Ogasawara, who's the CTO for Cloudian. We're going to be talking about ransomware in Kubernetes. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
Ransomware, of course, is everywhere, but it seems to also impact Kubernetes and container environments. And I wonder if people are thinking that through entirely, or do they think that somehow or other containers are magically secure because maybe they only last for a few seconds?
Right. I mean, part of the initial appeal of Kubernetes was what you mentioned, the idea that we automatically get security just from being Kubernetes. And there are some mechanisms to do that in terms of compartmentalization of resource and so on. But what we've seen especially recently, is that there's the same need for security, and in particular ransomware protection exists in those environments as in your traditional apps and traditional infrastructure environments.
Have you seen any ransomware attacks against Kubernetes yet, or is this still in the land of theoretical?
No, I mean, I haven't seen any personally, but I've seen some reported in the press that have been on Kubernetes environments as well. And what happens? Well, I guess in those few cases that I saw is that Kubernetes was traditionally, it worked for stateless environments, right? So like web or proxy servers that you could scale up and scale down, but they had no data in them. But now enterprises and orgs are starting to put stateful apps and persistent storage and managing that via Kubernetes. And once you do that, then that has the same vulnerabilities as any other type of storage or database that you store with that. So that's the risk, and that's the same for Kubernetes environments versus traditional environments.
And it seems to me that the applications that I'm going to go to the trouble of building for Kubernetes environments, and probably they're going to be microservices driven, are going to be valuable, right? Do you think the bad guys are starting to look for Kubernetes because it's a signal that says that there's something on the other end of that cluster that's worth stealing?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, there are, like you mentioned, Kubernetes specific issues or vulnerabilities. So one thing that we see often is that the Kubernetes environments, they often rely a lot on open source code. So open source, there's certain vulnerabilities that get out there and then that are very quickly exploited. So that you don't see that speed of exploitation as quickly as in enterprise software, for example. A couple other vulnerabilities. Kubernetes has traditionally, most people use the etcd database to store their data. And, the phrase there that Kubernetes people use is if you allowing access to that database is equivalent to root access on your cluster, because once you have that, then you have all the information about IP addresses and a lot of time even passwords and secrets to get into different places and privileges. You can modify the privileges of different users, et cetera. So that is a big vulnerability. And then the other thing we see in Kubernetes environments is often the containers or the actual code is downloaded from a container registry. And those are usually over the internet, right? So unless it's a very secure environment where the org has their own air-gapped container registry, a lot of things can occur, downloads can occur behind the scenes that are not necessarily watched for in a security sense.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that we're going to be proactive about security in Kubernetes environments? And I'm asking the question because if I look back in time, every time there's a new platform, it goes out, it shows up in production environments, and about 6 months to a year later, somebody starts asking some very hard questions about security. Is that going to be any different with Kubernetes? Are we going to be more maybe prescriptive or a little forethought, or are we going to have the same thing over again?
Well, I think the same thing is occurring again, but clearly there's a need. And then when there's a need and then the users start recognizing the need, then that's an opportunity for software vendors to come in and alleviate that need. So we're starting to see some very interesting solutions that are Kubernetes specific. So for example, Kubernetes specific backup and recovery solutions. There are things like Kasten that are specific to Kubernetes backup, and then they would back up the things that Kubernetes is interested in, for example, like and provide the management knobs to do it at the Kubernetes type resources, right? Like at the namespace level or at the pod level, et cetera. So the good thing is there's starting to become solutions that are coming into that space, and that'll allow this to become much more secure.
What is the relationship between security and storage these days? I mean, in theory, we would want the backup to be kicked off anytime that there was a detection of a potential attack or a threat to preserve a pristine copy of the data. Mm-hmm. But can we actually do that in near real time, or do we wind up just copying the malware into the backup and we're as far gone as we ever were?
Yeah, I don't see it in that type of schedule where it's proactively doing that based on a threat, but more you just want this regular backup cadence of doing daily backups, or if you're doing a update or before a big job, you would trigger off a manual backup. And that's the same type of as in a traditional environment. So the key is you need to have these backups at safe and secure. So talk about an immutable backup that the organizations can apply their standard security policies to protect. So you want that segregated from your network or much more highly protected from your network. And once you have those sets of backups, then you could start doing a very quick recovery when you're attacked, or even if it's some non-malicious type of exercise where you just want to get the data and state from that previous time. So that part's available and working well. And the nice thing about Kubernetes is that you have more labels, I guess you would call it, on what you want to back up and what you then want to recover. So instead of doing all or nothing, you could do it more selectively.
Do you think that maybe there's more focus on recovery these days than there was historically? It's always been about the backup, but I wonder if, given the nature of these applications today, that the recovery process needs to be a lot faster, especially in Kubernetes environments.
Yeah. That's sort of becoming the way to think about it. That more and more people are recognizing that even if they have the security perimeter security mechanisms in place, access control, other firewall level solutions around your cluster, you have to assume that that's going to be breached or gotten through. So once that happens, then you have to start thinking about if that happens. So we'll put in solutions that'll try to prevent the likelihood of that. But if that happens, how are we going to recover as quickly as we can? And having the playbooks and the scenarios to recover quickly in that case. So that's as we see security and disaster recovery plans, that's a very common way to describe it and tier the different approaches to recovering from that solutions.
Back in the day, at least, you would buy a backup recovery solution, and that was on top of the storage system. And then you bought some other replication stuff, and then you bought maybe some disaster recovery stuff, and you had this stack of software, and it kind of got expensive. Is that changing? Is a lot of the core capabilities of those offerings now features of something else, or how should we think about this?
It's changing to some extent. I think everybody wants a single solution, and more backup and recovery solutions are bundled. So from the users or consumers perspective, they can get one solution. And as those backup and recovery software, how they tend to work with the backend storage, from our company, Cloudian, we integrate to a lot of these backup recovery solutions because we provide the backend storage of that can be stored on premises or in the cloud. And that might be the only type of decision that needs to be made by the consumer in terms of how they configure that backup recovery software, because you still want that underlying backup to be safe and secure. So how do you do that? You might not want to put it in the same public cloud that you already are hosting your solution in. You might need to have that on premises and in a more secure location or way that you have control over that data.
As we go forward, one of the things about Kubernetes that at least I find interesting is it kind of gives you a common control plane for a lot of different functions.
Right.
You got compute, storage, so now will security become part of that common control plane, and we'll be able to manage these things in a more hand in glove fashion.
Right. So you're right. Kubernetes has a lot of good knobs to do that. So I think the most important one is namespaces. So the ability to have your applications and your data associated to that segregated by namespaces. Then you could have from security, the key is you want to limit the blast radius. Assume something gets compromised, what's the blast radius of that problem? So by doing things like specifying Kubernetes namespaces or specifying tags on different Kubernetes resources, then you could control the security and assign roles and access based on that security level. So there's some level at Kubernetes where it provides that mechanisms, and then you can secure that at the Kubernetes layer or at the application layer. And that's useful. But then we've been talking about underlying all of that. If that's at the Kubernetes application layer, there's still this base resources that are shared and need to be secured and backed up themselves. So there's knobs there, but still a Kubernetes user cannot ignore the underlying resources and how that's deployed and implemented.
All right, so it won't do it for me. Do you think at some point maybe we'll see machine learning algorithms and AI playing a larger role here, and perhaps we can save us from ourselves?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think almost that might be overkill for the security problem. I think with security, you want to keep it as simple as possible, especially operationally as simple as possible, of knowing where your data is and how safe and secure that data has been, and providing the mechanisms to recover from that problem. So for machine learning applications, I think one possibility that we would like software to get smarter about is being more sophisticated in terms of figuring out what to back up and when. So sort of to that point you rose earlier about, we'd like to, once we start to detect a threat starting to happen, we'd like to take action immediately and start taking countermeasures for that. So that's the area where there's a lot of activity from the perimeter defenses in terms of using machine learning algorithms on it. And I think at the more inner layers of the resource management themselves, there's some opportunities to do that themselves. So that's an interesting area. I think it's almost at applying machine learning algorithms is almost, step N after we first take the first few steps to secure our environments.
All right. So what is your best advice to folks about how to go secure a Kubernetes cluster?
So think about it in the same way that you think about traditional application environments and infrastructure environments. The same problems exist. And, it's a 3-step process that we've been talking about at Cloudian. Avoid, so the standard security mechanisms, the standard tiering of all the security solutions from the perimeter out. So avoid the security threats, then protect your data, encryption and different ways to create immutable copies, and then provide a third step of, you need to have a recovery strategy. You need to have a quick way to recover your data when an incursion happens. So avoid, protect, recover. That's the 3 steps that we talk about.
All right, awesome. Hey, Gary, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
All right, that wraps up another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today's broadcast was chock full of goodness for everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's conversations as much as I enjoyed getting them out to you. We are going to be back with a brand new episode tomorrow, but before we close things out today, just a couple quick reminders. We have a virtual event happening tomorrow. It is the Sneak Know Your Code Open Source and Supply Chain Summit. That is happening March 1st. It's a half-day event, I believe it is, and obviously very, very relevant topic for today's times. On March 3rd, we have another very relevant topic. This is a virtual summit. It is the Salt Security API Security Summit. API security is something that has been hitting the headlines a lot lately, and so we have a really amazing lineup of speakers for that event. So I do encourage you to check out both of those events. You can go to techstrongevents.com and take a look at the agenda, at the lineup of speakers, and register for them. It's not too late. You can always register, even if you're not able to actually make the event itself. You go ahead and register, and you can see everything on demand. We also have some live events coming up, starting at the end of March. The first one is our Techstrong, the DevOps Cloud Native Live event happening in Atlanta. It's a one-day event that talks about all things cloud native and DevOps related. It's got some really great hands-on workshops, some takeaways, learning sessions. You name it, we got it in that one-day event. The very next day, in the very same place, we've got Cybersecurity Live, and this is going to be a really, really fascinating event, and we're going to be doing it all again 2 weeks later in Washington, D.C. So we've got these events that are going to be happening all across this nation of ours throughout the year in select cities. So you definitely want to check out the schedule of events for those. That can be had on techstrongevents.com as well. Finally, want to remind you of our Innotech events. They're one-day conferences happening, actually, I think, are they 1 day, 2 day? I can't remember, but they are happening also in other cities around the country. They are one-day events focusing on cybersecurity, DevOps, and other general IT events. So we've got one coming up in Austin. We've got them in Dallas, Oklahoma City, where else? Houston, Washington, D.C. throughout the year. So definitely, again, want to check the calendar for that. So for all of these events, you can go to techstrongevents.com and take a look at the lineup. We've got other events happening throughout the year as well, so you can check out those while you are there. All right, that's it. I'll be back tomorrow, the first day of March, my favorite month of the year. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.